It started with the worst Thanksgiving that anyone in our family could remember. Granny Lorraine was dying, even if nobody wanted to admit it. And that meant we'd be spending the holiday at her rundown farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. My father joked that the drive would be worth it just to make sure that she was really dead. Even at 10 years old, I thought it was an ugly thing to say, but I also couldn't blame him. There was a reason why my mother and her siblings lived as far away from Granny Lorraine as they could get, and why most of them had never been back to that farmhouse since they had left. To call Granny Lorraine cruel would have been an understatement. Every word out of her mouth was either a criticism or an insult, and I couldn't imagine what it must have been like growing up with her 24/7. A miserable, sleet-like rain was falling as we pulled up the muddy gravel driveway. I recognized Uncle Alan's beat-up Crown Vic, Uncle Isaac's pickup, and Aunt Carol's shiny new SUV already parked beside the house. We were the last ones to arrive. My mom opened an umbrella over my head and steered me through the front door. It actually felt colder inside of Granny Lorraine's house than it had outside. Apart from the beeping of medical machines and Aunt Carol's smoker's cough, the house was silent. Then in the dining room at the end of the hallway, I saw her. And Granny Lorraine lay with her eyes closed, surrounded by beeping machines and the reek of cleaning fluid. Most of her hair had fallen out and she seemed to have shrunken somehow. The withered body beneath the sheets reminded me unsettlingly of one of my cousin's toy dolls. Late again as usual, Granny Lorraine snapped. I suppose you two roly-poly lunks had to stop for donuts on the way, didn't you? While you were at it, you should have got some food for the boy. With that weak chest and awful haircut. Looks like a toilet brush. Our appearance was one of Granny Lorraine's favorite topics to comment on. I suddenly felt a little less bad for her. We're here because you're sick, Ma, my mother said. Granny Lorraine snatched her hand away. She had become so gaunt that it almost looked like a claw. I know why you're here, you pack of vultures. Granny Lorraine screeched. You're here for the inheritance. My Uncle Alan, who had been sitting in the shadows, took a look around and laughed. The house was so old and run down that it was barely standing, and it was government assistance, or us, that paid the bills. Oh, chuckle all you want, Baldy, Granny Lorraine snorted. You'll get what's owed to you. It had sounded almost like a threat. I wondered if Granny Lorraine was losing her mind. Her eyes darted around the room, following the movements of something that wasn't there. What must it feel like to have dementia, to see things that nobody else could see? The thought sent a shiver up my spine. Now, Granny Lorraine rasped, where's my favorite grandson? I cringed. I had been dreading this moment since we had first arrived. My throat was dry as I approached the bony form beneath the sheets. Up close, it was like I could smell the decay on her breath. Her hand shot out with surprising force and pulled my face towards her. For an awful moment, I thought she was going to kiss me. Oh, don't talk to him, don't acknowledge him at all. And remember, the worst thing he can do is drive you mad. I had no idea what Granny Lorraine was ranting about, but her long dirty fingernails were digging into the skin of my neck. I pulled away with a shout, and then all hell broke loose. Granny Lorraine's eyes rolled backwards until they looked like a pair of white marbles. She toppled over convulsing, while the machines hooked up to her all shrieked in unison. The state-appointed nurse came running up, but it was obvious that there was nothing that she could do. Granny Lorraine was gone. I lifted my hands up like a criminal being arrested and I backed slowly away. My aunts and uncles were all staring at me, although no one said so. I could see the accusation in their eyes, as though what had just happened was somehow my fault. Maybe after so many years of being bullied by Granny Lorraine, each of them felt like they should be the one to hear her final thoughts. Well, My Uncle Isaac finally demanded, "What did she say?" "I don't know." I shook my head. "She was rambling." I clutched my stomach and said that I felt sick. My mother guided me to one of the bedrooms upstairs. I could already hear shouting from down below. Granny Lorraine may not have had much of a legacy, but that didn't prevent the family from squabbling over what little remained. Sometimes the most vicious fights are over the pettiest prizes. My mother sighed as she tucked me and handed me a glass of water. And to think, they haven't even started planning the funeral yet. I rolled over and watched the icy rain splatter against the bedroom window. Why had I lied about Granny Lorraine's last words? I had only pretended to be nauseous earlier, but the more that I thought about the whole thing, the more that I began to feel genuinely sick to my stomach. Why did grandmother have to go and croak right after telling me something so weird? I didn't want to spend all afternoon laying in bed feeling sorry for myself, but I also didn't want to run into one of Uncle Alan chugging whiskey in a storage room, or be forced to gossip with Aunt Carol. Through the floorboards, I could hear hushed greetings and clomping footsteps in the hallway. Even more relatives were arriving. Nephews, cousins, strangers who I had never met. I felt exhausted just thinking about it. I was about to climb out of bed and search for something to read when the hairs on the back of my neck all stood up at once. Until that moment, I had always thought that goosebumps were just something from storybooks. A person couldn't actually feel that they were being watched. Could they? I turned over again, this time toward the wall. The dark shape in the corner could have been an antique coat rack or a shadow cast by the bookshelf. But it wasn't. The hardwood floor creaked beneath the man's boots. When he reached up to remove his old-fashioned stovepipe hat, his knuckles scraped against the ceiling. He twirled it between his long fingers as he approached. His breaths came in quick, excited little wheezes, like he was glad to see me. My mom had always complained about how the 10-foot-high ceilings in Granny Lorraine's house were never able to keep any of the warmth, which meant that the man in front of me was at least 8 feet tall. His long, baggy coat was so covered in grime that it was impossible to tell its original color. It may have been black. Was he some distant acquaintance of Granny Lorraine's come by to pay his respects? If so, what was he doing in the upstairs room? I was about to ask when I remembered Granny Lorraine's words. Don't talk to him, don't acknowledge him at all, and remember, the worst thing he can do is drive you mad. The stranger tiptoed closer. His spine bent grotesquely as he bent over the bed, observing me with wide, hungry eyes. I realized with horror that the man's neck was extending somehow, stretching toward me like some kind of awful python. His fingers drummed even faster on the brim of his hat. When our faces were almost touching, he opened his mouth and licked his wormy purple lips. I had never seen anyone with such jagged teeth or so many of them. I pulled the covers up over my head and shut my eyes tight. The sound of the tall man's teeth gnashing above me was so loud it felt like it was coming from inside my own skull. The worst thing that he can do is drive you mad. I repeated the phrase over and over in my head, but I couldn't quite believe it. Until suddenly, the noise stopped. Apart from the patter of the rain and the grumblings of the adults downstairs, the bedroom was silent. Even so, I didn't dare to peek out from beneath the covers. Maybe that was exactly what the tall man wanted. Maybe that was what he was waiting for. I lay still like I was playing dead, and I counted the ticks of the old-fashioned grandfather clock in the hallway, and then a hand wrapped around my shoulder. "Oh, buddy," my father sighed. "You must be feeling awful. You want to talk about it?" I lowered the sheets. Apart from my father and me, the room was empty. I did want to talk about what had just happened, very badly in fact, but that was exactly what Granny Lorraine had warned me not to do. For all I knew, the tall man was out in the hallway, waiting for me to mention him, and what would he do then? I thought of those long fingers with too many joints, and all of those shark-like teeth crammed into a human mouth, and I shuddered. My father told me that dinner was ready and offered to bring up a tray to me, but I shook my head. The last thing that I wanted was to lay around by myself waiting for the tall man to show up again. I got to my feet shakily and followed my father downstairs. On the way, I looked for the tall man's face in the yellowed family photographs that lined the walls, but I found nothing. The house was packed. Cousins who I had never met before clapped me on the back, offering their condolences. Uncle Isaac and Aunt Carol were bickering about what to do with Granny Lorraine's body as they pulled trays of food out of the oven. Uncle Alan just sat in the corner and threw back slugs of whiskey from the bottle. As uncomfortable as the whole thing was, I was grateful for the noise and distraction that so many relatives provided. It helped me to avoid thinking about the tall man for a little while at least. I ran into Uncle Alan outside the bathroom after dinner. From the cold sweat on his forehead and the sour smell on his breath, I figured he had been puking his guts out. He smiled boozily and held open the door. "I know this sucks, kid, but it'll all be over soon, trust me." Something moved in the dark hallway behind Uncle Alan. I bit down a scream as the grinning visage of the tall man appeared out of the shadows above him. "What is it, kid? What's wrong?" Uncle Alan turned unsteadily. "Oh shit." The tall man's face contorted with fury. He clamped a hand over Uncle Alan's face, smothering his shout with the other. He opened the lapel of his filthy overcoat. There was only blackness on the other side. Uncle Alan barely had time to kick his legs and flail his arms before he was flung into the void. The tall man closed his coat, and then cocked his head to the side as though daring me to speak. I forced myself to look toward the warm golden glow of the kitchen, where the adults were still laughing, arguing, and scraping forks against plates, completely unaware of what was in the house with us. As I began to walk toward them, I could feel the tall man looming over me, matching me step for step. If my mother or father saw him, would they meet the same fate as Uncle Alan? Back in the kitchen, the cousins were getting ready to leave, and my mother and her siblings were working out the sleeping arrangements. I begged my parents to let me sleep on a fold-out cot in the room, and they reluctantly agreed. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to protect them or whether I wanted them to protect me, but I hoped that there would be safety in numbers. Aunt Carol and Uncle Isaac would each sleep in their childhood rooms, understandably. Nobody wanted to take Granny Lorraine's. No one mentioned Uncle Alan. The cousins shuffled out into the night, most of them still stuttering about what a bunch of ungrateful city slickers we all were. I held out hope that I would see the tall man leaving with them, but there was no such luck. Unless I had just imagined him, he was still in the house with us. I stuck close to my parents that night. I wouldn't even go to brush my teeth alone. I caught my father whispering something about trauma or age regression. They probably figured that my strange behavior was a result of witnessing Granny Lorraine's death, and if so, that was fine with me. I lay awake in my lumpy cot long after both of them had fallen asleep. My mind buzzed with questions. Who was the tall man? What did he want? How would Granny Lorraine known about him in the first place? The branches scraping against the window pane sounded like his fingers, and whenever a draft made the door squeak on its hinges, I felt sure that he had come for us at last. When my eyes snapped open, it felt like I had only been asleep for a few minutes, but somehow I was certain that I had been asleep for much longer than that. My throat was parched, but I didn't dare to go for a glass of water. A light flickered on in the hallway. Someone coughed. Of course, Aunt Carol. When she couldn't sleep, she would smoke. I watched her shadow pass by the door. Seconds later, another followed after. Against my better judgment, I crept out of bed and peeked into the hallway. Aunt Carol was fumbling with the doorknob of her room. The tall man stood beside her close enough to touch, like he was waiting for her to notice him. Should I warn her, or back away and hope that nothing happened? Before I could decide what to do, the floorboards groaned beneath my feet. Aunt Carol looked my way. "Aunt Carol," I murmured as loudly as I dared. "Could you come here for a minute, please?" My aunt approached with a frown. The tall man crawled along the ceiling above her, his head twisted around backwards. I was amazed that she hadn't felt his breath on the back of her neck. I had to keep Aunt Carol distracted for just a few more minutes. I had a bad dream," I stammered. "Will you come with me to get a glass of water?" "Okay, fine." Aunt Carol rolled her eyes. The tall man did too, in a sick imitation of her expression. A few drops of saliva dribbled onto the floor between us. Before I could say anything else, Aunt Carol looked up, and she yelled. As she shrieked and pointed, the tall man opened his coat and dropped down, enveloping her within it. He rose to his feet and advanced on me, both sides of his coat held high like the wings of some enormous bat. From the abyss within, I thought that I could still hear Aunt Carol's distant and slowly fading scream. In just a few seconds, I too would be swept inside. "The worst thing that he can do is drive you mad. The worst thing he can do is drive you mad." "I'm going to get a glass of water," I said through gritted teeth and then turned toward the bathroom. Cloth rustled as the tall man's coat passed over me. Like a shadow or a bad dream, he was gone. That simple act, filling a glass, drinking it, and going back to bed, was the hardest thing that I had ever done. I shut the door tight behind me, pulled the covers up over my head, and I began to pray. "Please, please God, let him be gone when I wake up." The Thanksgiving morning dawned bright and clear. I stretched and sighed, content in my cozy cot, at least until I remembered where I was and what was happening. Granny Lorraine's death, the tall man, Aunt Carol, and Uncle Alan's gruesome disappearances. As it all came rushing back, I realized that my head wasn't the only one on the pillow. The tall man stared back at me, his mouth stretched into a wide smile. I gritted my teeth, rolled over, and got out of bed. My parents and Uncle Isaac were already downstairs in the kitchen, making coffee, chatting, and pouring Granny Lorraine's off-brand cereal into plastic bowls. It was strange. Aunt Carol and Uncle Alan were both missing, but nobody had asked about them. On my way down the stairs, I took down an old family photograph. I pulled my mother aside and showed it to her. "Who's this?" I asked, pointing to a much younger and happier Uncle Alan. "Who's who?" My mom squinted, confused. "Honey, there's nobody there. This is just me, your Uncle Isaac, and your Granny Lorraine." I wasn't sure which possibility terrified me more. The idea that she couldn't see Uncle Alan and Aunt Carol, or the idea that she was pretending not to see them. Did my parents know about the tall man too? Or did being taken by the tall man somehow erase people from existence? Either way, nobody included either Uncle Alan or Aunt Carol in the funeral arrangements. My father explained that we would be burying Granny Lorraine that morning, and then driving home in the afternoon. "Don't worry," he winked. "After today, you'll never have to set foot in this miserable place again." Once we had finished breakfast, I was ordered upstairs to shower and change clothes. I hated to make myself so vulnerable with the tall man around, but I had a plan. I left the lights on and the doors open. I checked behind the shower curtain and even sang hymns while I washed off. I had no way of knowing whether the noise and light would keep the tall man away, but I had to try something. So far, he had only been able to appear when I was alone or with one other person, but for all I knew, each person that he took made him that much stronger. I dried off and went to the closet for my stuffy, kid-sized suit, and that was how the tall man got me. When I stepped inside, he swung down from the ceiling, twisting hideously so that we were face to face. I began to scream, but then salvaged it with an old hymn. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. The tall man's face darkened as though I had disappointed him. It was a perfectly ordinary face, mid-40s, light-skinned, sad green eyes, and somehow that made it all the more horrible. The tall man scowled and backed away into the gloom of the closet. While the adults got ready, I searched for clues about the tall man. Granny Lorraine didn't have a family tree or any genealogy books. The only reading material in the entire house was a stack of romance novels and tabloid magazines beside a recliner. I did, however, find a cardboard box full of my mother's old school things. At the very bottom was a stack of crayon drawings that she had done in kindergarten. They looked like the usual stick figure family that any child might draw, except for the tall figure in a stovepipe hat who appeared in the corner of every page. My heart skipped a beat when we all finally walked out together into the soothing fall sunshine. Was this it? Were we about to leave the tall man behind for good? My mother turned a key in the front door lock and then rested her head on the worn siding. "Bye, Ma," she sighed, and then stood tall and walked down to our car and climbed into the driver's seat. Uncle Isaac, who got car sick on the winding country roads, rode shotgun, while my father and I piled into the back seat. The engine turned over, and a few minutes later, Granny Lorraine's house was just a gray speck among endless fields of brown grass. Uncle Isaac turned around to ask my father something, and then clamped his hand over his mouth. The tall man had appeared in the seat between us. His spine had bent gruesomely to fit into the tight space, and his multi-jointed fingers were inching eagerly toward me. The tall man couldn't hurt me unless I acknowledged him, but my father didn't know that. He let out a grunt of surprise and swung a fist at the tall man's face. Now that sucker punch would have knocked out any ordinary man, but it only connected with empty air. The tall man contorted in the back seat like some awful boneless animal, twisting until he had stuffed my father inside that filthy overcoat. Memories of front yard ball games and fishing trips flashed before my eyes, and just as quickly my father had been swallowed up. My mother kept her hands perfectly placed on the steering wheel, like she was taking a driver's test. "So, honey," she forced herself to say, "what would you like for lunch after the funeral?" I don't know how I responded or how we managed to have a normal conversation, but by the time that we had reached the funeral home, the tall man had vanished once again. My tear-filled eyes locked with my mother's in the rearview mirror. It was the closest we ever came to talking about the secret that we shared. A few weeks after we buried Granny Lorraine, I got a letter in the mail from Uncle Isaac. There had been no sign of the tall man since he had taken my father, although whether that was because his hunger was sated or because he was biding his time, I had no idea. I still sensed him sometimes, waiting beneath a tree in the rain or in the grimy public bathroom stall beside mine, for example, but he hadn't actually appeared. Maybe that was what made me reluctant to open Uncle Isaac's letter, the fear that if I did, this whole thing would start all over again. To get my mind off of everything that happened, my mother had pressured me to take part in the school play. I reluctantly agreed, and while I soon discovered that I enjoyed acting and prop making, I didn't like the feeling of being at school after hours. All those empty corridors, Those long lines of silent lockers and darkened classrooms seemed like a perfect environment for the tall man. One gray Tuesday before winter break, my friends Chelsea and Aaron announced that they were going to stay late to paint the background scenery. We were putting on our play that Friday and time was running out. The last thing that I wanted was to spend even more time in that creepy after-hours auditorium. But the prospect of waiting around by myself for my mother to pick me up was even worse. I did my best to have fun with my friends, but the truth was, I was just waiting for something to happen. And so it did. Miss Healy, the play director, suddenly began looking a little green. She stood in a hurry and announced that she was going to the restroom, and that we had better behave until she got back. Chelsea, Aaron, and I managed to keep straight faces until she was out the door, and then we burst out laughing and started flicking paint at each other with our brushes. I didn't notice the gaunt figure moving behind the stage curtains until it was right in front of me. The moment that I saw the tall man, I knew that I wasn't going to let him take anyone else, no matter what it took. I grabbed the jar of paint and splashed it into Chelsea's eyes. Aaron's jaw dropped, but he had no time to react before I got to him as well. By the time that Miss Healy got back, both of them were crying and rolling on the floor, and the tall man had faded back behind the curtains with a scowl. Of course, I was removed from the play and suspended. There was talk of psychiatrists or even lawsuits, but it came to nothing in the end. My mother went through the motions of punishing me, but I think she understood better than anyone why I might have done what I did. And all the time at home finally gave me a chance to read Uncle Isaac's letter. And by the time you read this, it began, I'll be someplace where he can't find me. Or at least I hope so. I can't do this anymore. I can't go on waiting for him to make me jump or gasp at the wrong moment. I can't go on pretending that the people around me aren't being crammed inside of that horrible black coat. I wish I had some answers for you, kid. I can't tell you what he is or where he came from. All I know is, once you start seeing him, you can't stop. He's everywhere. And here's another thing, something that I think about a lot late at night while I'm trying to drink myself to sleep. What if our family aren't the only ones? What if sooner or later one of those awful things appears to everybody? What if just about everyone you meet is sharing that same horrible secret, but as soon as anyone tries to acknowledge it, a tall man takes them away? At first, I thought that he would come for me as soon as I started writing this. I thought that somehow he would understand that I was breaking the rules. But you know something? He's hovering over my shoulder right now. He can see the words on the page and the pistol that I've got pressed against my chin, and from the rumbling noise in his chest and the drool running down his chin, he's laughing. Weeks passed before the police found Uncle Isaac's body. The worst he can do is drive you mad, Granny Lorraine had said. At first, her words had felt comforting, but now they seemed like a curse. I would never be able to let my guard down. The tall man would always be there around a corner behind a curtain, or crawling across the ceiling of a dark room. He would always be trying to break my resolve and take the ones that I loved. Even back then, I thought that I could understand why Uncle Isaac had done what he did. A few days later, however, something happened that made me swear never to follow in my uncle's footsteps. It was around 9 o'clock a few days before Christmas. My mother was in the shower and I was sitting on the living room floor playing video games. I had found that the bright colors and repetitive motions helped to numb the pain that I'd been feeling since the tall man had come into my life. I had just paused to take a drink of water when the doorbell rang. Ordinarily, the tall man never announced himself, but something about that long, lonely chime gave me a sinking feeling. I mean, who else could be on our porch so late at night? The shower was still running, and I knew that I would be in serious trouble if I didn't answer it. And so I dragged my feet to the front door. I peeked through the side window, but all I could see was the wet and black asphalt of the street and snowdrifts lit by Christmas lights. If it was the tall man, the last thing that I wanted to do was accidentally acknowledge him by asking, "Who is it?" I gulped and opened the door. The package delivery man outside looked chilled to the bone. He rubbed his hands together, blew on them, and then passed me a package with a pen. "Sign for this." It was addressed to my mother, and I realized with a twinge of guilt that she had probably ordered me a last-minute Christmas present. I scribbled on the pad the delivery driver handed me and waved goodbye to him. He was slogging his way back through the snow to his truck when I noticed a pair of black boots standing beside me on the frozen doormat. The tall man. He seemed to be watching the house across the street. At first, I couldn't see what was so special about it. It was just an ordinary suburban house, with an ordinary suburban family gathered around the television in its living room. I could see them through the window, sipping mugs of hot chocolate while they watched some feel-good holiday movie. A father, two twin boys, a baby girl, and... No, it couldn't be. Another tall man rested his hands on the back of the baby's bouncy chair while she leaned toward the screen oblivious. His boots, a top hat, and black overcoat were identical to those of the tall man beside me. But his face was Uncle Isaac's. Although there was no way of knowing across such a long distance, I felt sure that he had seen me. I bit my cheeks to mask the horror on my face and then backed through the front doorways, though I had done nothing more than collect a package. The tall man pressed his face against the window. He held a 5-jointed finger up to his lips and grinned. I turned away. When I glanced over my shoulder again, both of the tall men were gone. It didn't matter though. I knew that they would be back. It's possible that I'm not the first one to try to tell the world about the tall man. For all I know, all the letters people have written over the years all wound up stuffed into the void inside those long dark codes, and all the forum posts mysteriously disappeared into the black hole of cyberspace. For those who don't know, the truth sounds insane. For those who do, it's too dangerous to repeat. Maybe you have no idea what I'm talking about. But even if you've never seen a tall man, don't worry. Someday you will. Today's episode is sponsored by Rocket Money. You ever look at your budget and think, wait a second, I should have more money left over than this? Maybe your spreadsheet says that there should be extra money sitting in your account, but somehow it's just not there. Yeah, something must be off. That's where Rocket Money comes in. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. You'd be surprised how easy it is to lose track, from forgotten subscriptions quietly charging your card every month, to ordering takeout a few too many times. Rocket Money helps you rein it all in. Their app lays out your entire financial picture in one place: bills, paydays, spending habits, so it's actually easy to understand. You can set up custom budgets based on your past spending, cancel subscriptions you don't use anymore, and even let Rocket Money negotiate your bills down for you. Rocket Money has saved users over $2.5 billion, including over $880 million in canceled subscriptions alone. Their 10 million members save up to $740 a year when they use all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/MrCreeps today. That's rocketmoney.com/MrCreeps. rocketmoney.com/MrCreeps. You found it where? That was my reaction when my team leader came into the operations room and told us that they found one of the staircases in the middle of a forest. This was the first occurrence of it manifesting outside the facility, and it caused both confusion and worry for us in the exploration team. For the past few months, the organization had been experimenting in interdimensional travel, but not in the way that you would expect. Instead of opening up wormholes and using portals, they used a method that seemed strange and laughable to us at first. Staircases. Yes, that's right, plain old wooden staircases. I won't go into the exact science behind it because even I don't really understand how it works. It's complicated, extremely complicated. One glimpse at these squints boards and walls were enough to tell me that it was all beyond my understanding. Not that that's saying much, since most of us in the exploration team are pretty down on the scale, since they only require people who are healthy, could carry the necessary equipment, and can follow instructions. Anyways, all I know is that whenever the scientist activates some kind of ancient machine, it manifests a staircase with a set of 10 steps that seemingly leads to nowhere. However, despite its rather simple and innocent sight, it was actually a gateway to a room in another dimension. From the bottom of the staircase, it was hard to tell where it would lead you. Going up the first few steps didn't change much and you would still see nothing. But once you get to that last step, you're taken to a whole new dimension. What extra dimensional room the staircase would lead to was always a mystery. It was different every time a staircase was conjured up, and no two staircases ever led to the same place. The only consistent thing was that it led to a room, sometimes extremely large and sometimes extremely small, but always a room with no exit. Other than that, nothing was certain. Was it going to be safe? Would it be inhabited? Would it be useful for humanity? These were questions these scientists would ask every time they spawned a staircase. It was up to the exploration team to find the answers for them. Now I know what you're thinking. Why not send a drone or a robot in there? Wouldn't they do the same job without risking human lives? Well, it turns out that interdimensional hopping is not friendly with such technologies. For some reason that I, as well as these science boys, do not know why yet. Anything digital just gets fried when crossing dimensions. And that's why unmanned options were quickly rolled out and why we in the exploration teams had to use analog equipment. Recruited from those people who would not be missed or were crazy enough to abandon everything and go head first into danger. We in the exploration team were essentially guinea pigs that were paid considerably for their role in science. Personally, I like to think of myself as belonging to the latter group. But let's face it, I'm more of the former. No significant other, no more living family that I'm close with, not even a dog. I was a nobody. But at least I was a rich nobody. I just gotta make sure that I lived long enough to be able to spend the wealth that I was accumulating. And luckily for me and everybody on the team, most of the dimensions that we had explored had been largely harmless. Creepy, but harmless. From an empty room with nothing but pitch black darkness to a humongous one that was filled with mountains of bones and rather passive of floating eyes. And the places we explored were enough to give anyone nightmares. That's probably why we had to go through constant psych evaluations before and after each exploration. However, as interesting these strange and terrifying dimensions were, they were not what our organization wanted. After all, the goal of the organization was to find a dimension that would greatly benefit humanity. At least that's what they told us. Talk in the mess room, though, says that it was more on finding a dimension that could bring a large profit for the top dogs who run the organization. Personally, I don't care, as long as they keep on giving me my paycheck. With all the previous dimensions giving nothing that satisfied the organization's demands, the scientists were under constant pressure to find one that would bring in the money. This pressure on them was all too evident to us in the exploration team, as our old pace of exploring 2 staircases a week soon shifted to 14 staircases a week. It quickly became tough for us to work, as we found ourselves constantly in demand. If we were lucky, we would get a small room that only required one member of the team looking around for a few minutes, but we were never lucky. Ever since the science team started working on overdrive, the rooms that we got were mostly the big ones. Not only that, but they seemed to get constantly bigger with each new staircase conjured up, often taking the full team hours to explore. These rooms were time-consuming and exhausting. To make matters worse, once we were done, we often walked down the stairs empty-handed. It was clear that the bigger rooms were just as devoid of anything useful or profitable as the smaller ones. After nearly 3 weeks of this, morale was low for everyone. We did, however, catch a day's break when we were told that the science team were going to work to adjust the ancient machinery in order to get better results. This breakthrough didn't last though, because that was the same day that a staircase manifested in the middle of the forest. The tech boys were messing around with their machine when it suddenly activated on its own, our team leader Jonathan said after giving us the shocking news. Strangely though, nothing appeared. They checked and swept the testing floor but found no new staircases. They then checked the rest of the facility and still found nothing. With no luck, they then had to ask the security team to send out vehicles and choppers to scan the nearby area. They eventually found the thing in the middle of a forest 20 miles from here. 20 miles, I said. I didn't know it was possible for them to spawn that far from the machine. Yeah, well, after all the tinkering the tech boys have done, I think anything is possible with that toy of theirs at this point, Jonathan huffed. Yeah, anything except find the dimension that the higher-ups want, I remarked. So what happens now then? Rachel, one of the newest members of the team, had asked. They want us to explore it, Jonathan simply said. No use in wasting a good set of staircases, I guess. Henry, an explorer who had joined the same time as me, sighed. You know it, Jonathan said. All right, I want section 2 on this. I winced when I heard this. That was my section. We head out in 10 minutes, so be there at the transport bay with all your gear and equipment, Jonathan informed us. The sooner we get there and get this done, the sooner we get back. And who knows, we might get lucky and get a small one. As if. Charlie, the most senior member of Section 2, replied. We haven't had a small room for so long that I'm starting to forget what they look like. Small. Christine, the leader of our section, plainly replied. Just like you. Oh, shut up, Charlie groaned, as all of us in Section 2 got up and got ready for the sudden mission. An hour later, we were at the outpost the security and science team had set up near the rogue staircase. Looking around the little camp they made, I couldn't help but find it all too familiar. Aside from the dirt and trees, all the equipment set up around the staircase made it feel similar to the setup that they had back at the facility. For a second, this made me think that everything was going to be routine as always. After being briefed by the science team and gearing up, we were quickly lined up at the bottom of the staircase with Jonathan at the lead. He had the habit of wanting to be the first one to cross in any mission that he was involved in. I guess he felt that the leader of the exploration team must always be ready to lead from the front whenever the opportunity arose. Check your suits and double-check them, he told us as he gazed up at the stairs. You never know what could be out there waiting for us. He didn't need to tell me twice. I was already busy scrutinizing every inch of my hazmat suit before the words left his mouth. Since the rooms we entered were never meant for humanity to step foot on, many of them contained various hazardous elements that we needed to protect ourselves from. Thus, all of us on the team were equipped with the best hazmat suits the organization had. As we finished checking our suits, Jonathan began moving down the line to double-check our suits himself, as well as tugging on our safety harness and lanyard. Protocol demanded that anybody crossing dimensions must be secured by a safety harness tethered to a mechanism that was ready to pull us back to safety. Although it gave us some reassurance that we would be rescued from danger when needed, Its true purpose was to recover the valuable data and samples that we gathered. Through the use of various equipment ranging from VHS cameras, Geiger counters, range-finding equipment, and sample collection tools, every section that entered a room was well equipped to attain all the information that the eggheads needed. To their dismay though, we couldn't transfer the data as fast as they wanted to, and there was always the risk of it being lost if we encountered trouble. Ideally, we would have transmitted the information the moment that we got them, since the eggheads often got anxious waiting and it lessened the chance of losing data if we didn't make it back. However, for whatever reason, radio and phone cable communication between two dimensions doesn't work. This thus left us with no other choice but to write down the data and place them in a canister, before tossing it back to the other side. Now, this was easy for the smaller rooms, but nearly impossible for the larger ones. And that's why we often just noted down the readings that we got so that in the event that we were incapacitated or worse, they could just reel us back in with our notes and samples. Once our suits and equipment were checked multiple times, Jonathan returned to his position at the head of the line and gestured to the lead scientist that we were ready to enter. Once he had received confirmation, he looked back at us and gestured towards the staircase. "I'll go in first to check the situation on the other side. With any luck, this would just be a small room," he said before taking the first step. "Hopefully not too small," I heard the muffled voice of Charlie say behind me. I couldn't help but nod at this. The story of one member from a different section entering a room that was only 1 foot by 1 foot in size was a story familiar to everyone in the team. Like I said earlier, the rooms are mostly harmless, but not completely. Every once in a while, a section would encounter a dangerous room that would bring on casualties. As I stood there, I prayed that what we were about to encounter was not one of them. But I didn't want to bring my hopes up. It had been a good while since a dangerous room had been encountered. Add that to the fact that this staircase was far from normal, then the chance of its room being equally far from normal were high. Shaking my mind away from these thoughts, I returned my focus back to reality and looked towards Jonathan, who was already going up the staircase, halting at the second to last step. Jonathan paused for a few seconds to check the compact camcorder that he was carrying. After making sure that it was on, he cautiously took the final step and soon vanished from our sight. All of us knew that he was now on the other side as we held our breaths and anxiously waited for his return. If he didn't come back within 5 minutes, the emergency recovery system would be activated, and he would be yanked back to our dimension. To our relief though, we saw him come back down to the second to the last step after only 2 minutes. Bad news, everyone. The room is huge. Other than that though, it seems pretty safe. All readings are normal and there are no beings or anomalies wandering nearby, he informed us before pausing to think. I couldn't see the walls from where I stood, but my estimates say that it's a class 5 or more. That last remark was for both us and the science team. A class 5 room meant that we had at least 5 hours to explore the place and gather data before the recovery team would begin pulling us back if we did not return. "Alright then," Christine, who was now heading up the stairs, said. "Let's check this place out and hopefully find something interesting." Personally, I would rather find nothing than something interesting, but I followed close behind her with the same enthusiasm as the rest of the section. As Christine approached the top, Jonathan turned back and crossed dimensions again. Following close behind was Christine, camcorder already in hand, and soon enough, she too disappeared, leaving me to follow next. Making sure that my own camcorder was on, I made my final step in our dimension and crossed to the other side. What I saw was not what I expected. Instead of seeing a large room with Jonathan and Christine waiting for me, I saw a set of stairs leading downwards towards a small clearing in a dark forest. At first, I thought that I somehow got disoriented and I was looking back down the staircase, but that didn't make sense. because there was nobody else there. No members of my section, no members of the science, recovery, and security team. No one. This was not the same place. In fact, it wasn't even the same time of day. When I made the crossing, it was clearly daytime, and over here, though, it was night. This was strange. No, it was beyond strange. Encountering a room that looked like a forest wasn't anything new. Many sections have seen some of the rooms before. But to have the vanguard of the section disappear without a trace, now that was something that I'm not sure had happened before. Sighing, I lifted my camcorder and began to film my surroundings. Meanwhile, I kept my head on a swivel, using the flashlight of my suit's hood to light up the nearby trees. "Jonathan, Christine," I called out, hoping to hear a reply. But there was no response, and I could see no sign of anybody nearby. At that point, I realized that the place must not have been as safe as Jonathan had originally thought. If the two of them were missing, then it could mean that something in the environment or something lurking in this area could have eradicated or taken them. Feeling the fear rising within me, I dropped the camcorder and allowed it to dangle from its cord. With my now free hand, I quickly grabbed my Geiger counter, turned it on, and began using the probe to scan the area around me. To my relief, though, the readings only read 0.20 microsieverts per hour. That was a normal amount for background radiation. However, this data did little to completely ease my fear, and there was still the question of what happened to my team leader and section leader. Cautiously, I scanned my surroundings again, trying to see if there was anything lurking there and waiting to pounce on me, but I found none. So I was left there, standing all alone, wondering what had happened to the two of them. It was at that moment of wondering that another realization hit me. Why was I alone here? Concerned, I decided to look behind me, hoping to see the other members of my section walk in. They should have already crossed, but maybe there was a delay on the other side that I didn't notice when I jumped in. As these seconds passed, though, not a single one appeared. As these seconds turned into minutes with still no sight of them, I knew that they were not arriving. This was not right. They should be close behind me, as something terribly wrong was happening. Trying my best to keep calm, I tried to think on how I should proceed next. However, as I was thinking, my eyes fell on a bone-chilling sight. Crouching down, I grabbed my lanyard and lifted it up to my eyes. Seeing it up close only confirmed what I already caught a glimpse of. It had been cut. Studying it in complete shock, I saw a neat, clean cut on it. Not a tear, but a straight cut, as if somebody had used a knife. If it was a knife, though, then it must have been an extremely strong knife to be able to cut through the lanyard that the organization used. Whatever the reason for it being cut, one thing was clear. My only connection to my dimension had been severed. This was bad. I needed to get back. Protocol demanded that any loss of connection with the home dimension necessitated an immediate return. With that in mind, I dropped the lanyard and began feeling for the exit that should take me back. In my panic, I rushed towards the direction that I came from, expecting that I would immediately be taken back to my dimension. However, to my complete horror, instead of phasing through and reappearing back home, I instead fell from the top of the stairs that I was standing on, and I landed on the hard ground below. Landing on my left arm, I lay there stunned and in pain. I was sure that I had broken my arm from that fall, and the aching sensation it gave was terrible. Eventually, though, I managed to gather my strength and roll myself so that I would be facing upward. As I did so, I noticed what was staring down at me. It wasn't a ceiling like I had seen in so many rooms. Instead, it was an open night sky. Looking at it with disbelief, I felt that my eyes were betraying me. Never before has any exploration team encountered anything but a room. For a second, this made me speculate that what I was seeing wasn't the real night sky. Perhaps the room was just really tall and that I just couldn't see the ceiling. After all, we had encountered such rooms before. Then again, I don't think we ever found a room that had stars twinkling in its artificial sky. No, this wasn't a room. This was a real open space. I had never encountered something like that before. I don't think anyone in the exploration team has. The place just kept on getting stranger and stranger with each passing second. Managing to get up, I started to assess my injury and realized that I had broken a bone during the fall. Feeling the pain from the injury and knowing that I had to apply first aid, I cautiously looked for anything that I could use to make a splint. Finding a large twig, I began making the splint with it and bandages from my first aid kit. It hurt a lot, but I tried to control myself from making too much noise, or else attract any entities or creatures that may be lurking nearby. After all, I still wasn't sure if this place was fully safe. Once I was sure that the splint was good, I turned back towards the staircase and wondered if I was indeed trapped here. Moving back up the stairs, I halted at the last step and waved my good arm in front of me. Nothing. As an extra measure, I repeated the process, desperately praying that my hand would disappear. But it did not. There was no way back home. Sighing, I sat on the step, feeling defeated. It was at that moment when I noticed something odd about the trees. They had moved. I only caught a glimpse of it, but I was sure that they had moved. Locking my eyes on the closest tree, I watched them swing left and right, but there was no breeze. No, it wasn't the wind that made it do that. It was because it moved. Keeping my focus on them, I waited for it to do it again, but nothing happened. As if they were taunting me and making me question what I saw, the trees stayed still. However, just as I was about to give up, I saw it happen again. Right in front of me, the trees began to shift from where they were and move a good 30 feet. Without lifting themselves out of the ground, they pushed their way through the ground before halting and staying in place once more. Observing this a few more times, I realized that they seemed to be doing this every 15 minutes. Why they were doing it, I wasn't sure, but it certainly wasn't the weirdest thing that I've encountered when compared to past dimensions. It also didn't seem like a danger to me. It was just strange, just like any other dimension. So what had happened to Jonathan and Christine then? There must have been some other anomaly or entity hiding here. Wondering what my next move should be, I contemplated whether I should stay there and wait for rescue or if I should explore the surrounding area and find a way to save myself. After weighing the options, I eventually decided to go look around. The chance of somebody from my dimension coming to rescue me was slim to none. After all, we explorers were expendable and the organization was not going to expend resources trying to recover me or whatever data I may hold if the dimension that I was in was this dangerous. There was no profit in dangerous dimensions. It would only cost more for them. With that dreary thought in mind, I got up from the steps, went back to the forest floor, and began moving away from the staircase in order to explore this strange new place. There wasn't much to see though, even as I drifted farther and deeper into the forest. Everywhere that I looked was just more and more trees, doing their strange dance every 15 minutes. Aside from that, the land was empty and flat, with no landmarks or anything of interest. For half an hour, I found myself wandering around and wondering if I was moving at all, as the whole place looked the same no matter where I went. It was just rows upon rows of moving trees. However, as I continued in my search, I eventually noticed that the grouping of the trees started to become denser. From the average of 30 feet near the staircase, it lessened to 20 feet. And as I went on, it soon lessened to 10 feet, as the forest around me started to feel more crowded. Curious by this, I began to follow the dense clustering of trees. It was clear they were converging towards something. Eventually, I found what I was looking for. Nestled in between a circle of trees was one tree. At first, it looked plain and similar to all the other trees. However, after a few minutes passed by, the tree began to shake violently. Rocking in all directions, I first thought that it was about to fall. To my amazement, though, the tree remained rooted up, and instead shook out of it 8 similar trees, which began to move outward from it. Meanwhile, all the other trees surrounding them began to move outward too, as they shifted and made room for the newly created ones. The trees, perhaps all of the trees in the forest, came from that single tree. They were multiplying from it. They were all clones of that one tree. Sadly for me, it was of little help towards my situation. Sighing, I took a moment to sit down, being sure not to place myself in the path the trees moved through. Allowing myself a moment's rest, I let out a groan of both frustration and pain, feeling both my mental and physical state aching. A quick break from exploring is something that I clearly needed at that moment. However, before I could relax myself and clear my mind, a series of ear-piercing crackles suddenly echoed. These crackles then began to increase with each second until it reached a point that it was practically shrieking. It took me a second to realize that it was my Geiger counter going crazy. Worried by the sounds that it was making, I grabbed the device and brought it to my face to read the data that it was giving me. What I saw made my eyes grow wide. 1 million microsieverts per hour. Yeah, that was bad, extremely bad. I needed to get out of there. Prolonged exposure to that level of radiation would be fatal for me. Thus I wasted not a second more towards figuring out what could have caused the sudden spike in radiation, as my instincts quickly kicked in. Suddenly filled with adrenaline, I got myself up and began moving. It started off as a fast walk, but I soon quickened my pace until I found myself running. I didn't know where exactly I was running to, but I prayed that it was somewhere that had less radiation in the environment. Encountering the first bit of luck I had since arriving in the dimension, I was relieved when I glanced at the counter and saw the reading had lowered down to 500,000 per second. At least that told me that I was heading away from the source of the radiation. A little further down, I checked the device again and saw that the reading had lowered down to 100,000 microsieverts per hour. A minute later, and another check read 1,000 microsieverts per hour. This was good and much safer, but I decided to continue on further until the background radiation had dropped to 0.2 microsieverts per hour. Once I was sure that I was in safe ground, I allowed myself to catch my breath. Checking my surroundings as I did so, I saw that I was now in an area where the trees were more loose and far apart. But just like in any other portion of the forest, the trees seemed never-ending and there was no sign of the edge. Sighing, I stumped on the ground, feeling frustrated. There seemed to be no escaping this forest, and there seemed to be no escaping this dimension. Not wanting my mind to further wander towards depressing thoughts, I decided to look around once more in order to get my bearings. If anything, that would at least distract me from my own pessimism. With nothing helpful for me in the forest, I decided that it was best to return to the staircase and hope that the link back towards my dimension had returned. However, as I was trying to figure out that path back there, my Geiger counter started to act up again. Checking it, I was surprised to see that it was moving back towards 1,000 per hour. At first, I thought it meant that I ended up at another source of radiation. However, as I watched it rise to 100,000 microsieverts per hour, it dawned upon me that the source was not a stationary location, but it was moving and approaching me. That would explain why my Geiger counter only started going crazy after I sat down earlier, and not while I was approaching the area. It wasn't a place that was radioactive. It was some sort of mobile entity. Looking back towards where I had come from, I stared on with fear, wondering what kind of entity could be emitting such high levels of radiation. Not too keen on finding out, I began moving once more. The only good thing I thought at the time was that I seemed to be faster than the radiation-carrying entity. Despite this, I knew that there was still the possibility that it had better endurance than me. With my injury, I could only go so far before the pain would force me to stop, even with adrenaline still pumping in my veins. While I ran, I made sure to monitor the Geiger counter to ensure that its readings lowered as I got farther. As long as I kept it to 1,000 microsieverts per hour and below, I knew that I would be safe. To my dismay, though, that number held firm at around 100,000, telling me that it was keeping up pace with me. So much for being able to outrun it. And despite my best attempts to move faster, I found my efforts fruitless. As the Geiger counter started to shriek, it was gaining speed and it was getting closer. Daring myself to look behind me, I noticed a faint green glow emitting in the distance. Hidden by the trees, I couldn't quite see what was making that glow, but I did know that seeing its light meant that it was really close. For the next few minutes, I found myself running and dodging trees, doing my best to get away, but the sound of my Geiger counter told me that I was meeting little success and I was losing this game. And deep inside, I knew that the entity behind me would eventually catch up and get me. Not that it needed to be next to me to kill me. All it had to do was get close enough and maintain that distance in order to bombard me with more than 1,000,000 sieverts of radiation. Eventually, I knew that I was a goner. I didn't know how much time had passed, but the pain from my arm and exhaustion was getting to me. I was slowing down and the entity behind me was getting closer and closer. I gave up on checking my Geiger counter, but the sound of it shrieking told me that whatever was chasing me was close enough that I was being hit by high doses of radiation. Oddly enough, I didn't feel nauseous or sick from it. Instead, the only pain that I was feeling was from my arm. This, however, did little to ease my fear and sense of dread. Wanting to face my fate directly, I stopped in my tracks and I took in a deep breath. Closing my eyes, I then turned around and confronted my pursuer. When I opened my eyes, I found myself facing a bone-chilling sight. It was a tall, skinny woman whose skin was dried and glowing green. Staring at me with empty, hollow eyes, she gave a smile that nearly made my heart stop. Her cheeks, instead of being covered with skin, was completely exposed, revealing to me her rotten teeth. It looked as if she herself had been the victim of radiation. But I was not able to feel a single ounce of remorse for her, as I was too busy fearing for myself. Standing there in shock, I watched as she moved closer and closer towards me, her green glow almost blinding me from its shine. I wasn't going to run though. I was ready to face it head on. I thought that it might even be a good thing, as it would spare me from suffering in this endless land of trees. As the glowing woman got close, she briefly halted and placed her hand on my chest. Despite my suit, I felt the warmth of her hand on my skin. Looking down, I stared on in horror to see that her touch somehow melted away my suit and my clothing, leaving behind a gap that allowed her to touch my bare chest. Looking back at the glowing woman, she simply kept up that eerie smile, as her hollow eyes stared right into my very soul. It was unsettling and I found myself having difficulty breathing, but it wasn't from her touch, nor from the radiation that she was emitting. No, it was from the sight of her alone. Eventually, she pulled her hand away from me and turned away. Without doing anything else, she began to move away from me. I watched, completely confused, as she got farther and farther until she was a faint glow in the distance. That glow became less and less while my Geiger counter slowly started to ease the noise that it was emitting. Soon the glow was gone and my instrument was silent. I was alone again. Left baffled by what had just happened, I cautiously lifted my good arm and moved my hand towards my chest. Feeling for any wounds, I was surprised to see that she didn't seem to have left a mark on me. In fact, it didn't seem like any harm came to me, as I didn't feel any sickness from the radiation that I was exposed to. However, these positive thoughts came too soon, as my body suddenly started to shake uncontrollably. Feeling my muscles spasm, I was left helpless as pain suddenly overtook me. Letting out a cry of agony, I found myself constantly shaking while being overpowered with terrible sensations that made it feel like I was being torn apart. Not knowing what was happening and being bombarded by an avalanche of pain, all I could do was scream and cry as I fell onto the forest floor. I couldn't tell how long this went on for, but I know that I continuously begged for it to stop. Yet the pain kept on going and going, growing more and more in intensity. At one point, I thought I was going to go unconscious from what I was suffering, but my body refused to let me go out and I was left there tortured by the entire ordeal. Whatever that woman did to me, it didn't seem like it would end quickly. While I laid there shaking and in agony, I suddenly started feeling bloated. This was followed by a sensation of my limbs becoming swollen. Desperately, I tried to check myself, but to no avail. The pain was just too much and my eyes remained shut as I screamed and shook. The sensation of my body expanding continued on and I felt my splint, suit and clothes rip apart. This was bad and I feared that I was about to explode. It didn't seem like the best way to die, but during that terrible moment, I was willing to take any form of relief, even death. To my dismay, it didn't happen. Instead, I continued to suffer and feel myself seemingly inflating before a sudden snap struck me. It's hard to describe the feeling, but it was as if a part of me had suddenly ripped off. And then just like that, the pain subsided. Although feeling sore, I was relieved that the intense sensations that tormented every part of me had largely stopped. The pain of my broken arm was still prevalent though, especially after it had been aggravated by what had just happened. Despite this, what I was feeling was certainly better than what I had just endured, as it allowed me to think clearly and figure out what had just happened. As I was opening my teary eyes though, I was confronted by a sight that I did not expect. There, laying in front of me and staring at me blankly, was myself. At first, I thought that I was imagining things and was just hallucinating after the pain that I went through. But as I lifted my good arm and moved it in front of me, I felt my hand make contact with the bare skin of the version of me that was staring back at me. It was real and there really was a copy of me right there. It didn't take long for it to dawn on me what had just happened. That was my clone. It was a copy of me that spawned directly from me. I had become just like that tree. At that point, I had no doubt that she did the same thing to the tree after gracing it with her touch. Letting out a curse of anger, I did my best to get up as fast as I could, while the version of me seemingly copied what I did and tried to get up, albeit a little more clumsily. It may have been a copy of me, but it seemed to lack much sentience and fine motor skills. All it could do was copy my actions and do its best to mimic them. In keeping my distance, I stared at my copy with both fear and curiosity. In return, it stared back at me with cold and soulless eyes. For the most part, though, it didn't seem to be in any harm, as it seemed just confused and lost. So what was I to do now? That was the thought that circled my mind as I stood there. Recalling the tree that I encountered earlier, I shuddered at the thought that I would have to go through that process again. If I was cursed by the same thing that it had, then that meant I had 15 minutes before another clone would be forced out of me again. I was not looking forward to that at all. But what could I do to stop it? Nothing. The sad truth was that I was helpless to it. For a moment, I thought of laying back on the ground in despair, knowing that I would have to endure the cycle of torturous pain again when the time comes. I wished that the woman had just killed me. What she gave me was a fate worse than death, and I wondered how long I would have to endure it. If I was lucky, I would die from it. But the fact that I didn't go unconscious throughout the process didn't give me high hopes that I could escape the curse that easily. There was no hope for me. As if to prove this point, I suddenly felt my body shake again. Raising my good arm, I saw it intensely shake again, as my whole body began to spasm. Fear and anger rose up inside of me, as I felt the terrible process start up once again. Helpless at stopping it, all I could do was wonder why it was happening again so soon. The tree had taken 15 minutes before it had replicated itself, but for me, barely 5 minutes since I had a clone torn out of me, and a new one was about to come out. Why was it happening so fast? There was no time for me to answer that question though, as my body shook intensely once more until I felt myself increase in size again. It was painful and terrible. Experiencing it the first time did not prepare me for the second one. Just like before, I agonized and fell to the ground, screaming and shouting. All the while this was happening, the first clone just stood there and stared at me, its expression clueless and blank. I cursed at it as I laid there in pain. I cursed it, the woman, in this whole dimension. And then a familiar feeling of having a part of me splitting off came, and once more the pain began to subside. Sighing in relief, I felt comfort knowing that it had stopped. But then a sense of dread quickly struck me, as I knew that in a few minutes it would repeat, and I would have to do it all over again. Yet even the small brief window of rest was denied from me, as a second later my body began to shake again. Letting out a scream of frustration, I soon cried out in pain as the process started way faster than before. I was so engrossed in panic and fear that I barely noticed the recent clone that came for me. It was only when I was shaking on the ground and looking at the dark night sky that I noticed the clones. In fact, I saw 3 of them. For a moment, I was able to push out the pain as I stared at the 3 sets of eyes looking down at me with blank stares. 2 clones had come out of me, and not only was the process starting faster, but the number of clones was doubling. Did that mean it would become faster and increase in number each time that it happened? As if to answer my question, I felt my body inflate again and stretch my skin. Before long, 3 clones split off from me, rolling on the ground right next to me. Panting in weariness, I barely acknowledged them when the shaking started all over again. All I could do was scream in pain and let the tears roll down my eyes. I was in hell. For the next hour, the process kept going and going, torturing my body and making me experience that insane pain on repeat. No matter how much it happened though, my body somehow endured. I couldn't pass out, I couldn't die. I should have, I wished I could, but it didn't happen. My mind though was faring worse, as I was left trapped in my body that was painfully replicating over and over again. Eventually I lost track of time and I stopped screaming. All the screaming that I could do was in my head, as I watched more and more of my face stare down at me with empty expressions. If I could bash those faces in, I would, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed. As the process continued, the area that I was in started to get crowded by the bodies of my clones. Standing up after they spawned, they would just end up staying in place, not moving until pushed by the new set of clones. Looking around from where I lay, I saw a sea of feet, with the trees no longer visible. If I didn't move, I would end up trapped like that, forced to live in even worse hell than what I was already suffering. Managing to rally what little strength that I had left in me and ignoring the pain as best I could, I willed myself to stand up. It was difficult. The first few times I failed, as clones ripped themselves from me, making it tough to even get on my knees. With great effort though, and timing things just right, I was able to get up on my knees and with my free hand, shakily grab a newly created clone in order to pull myself up. Eventually I was on my feet, using the clone spawning from me as support. Looking around, all I could see was my own face, a sight that I was already sick of. The place was crowded, but there was still enough room to move around. But how long would it be before this whole place was filled with only copies of me? With a new one being ripped from my body every few seconds, I knew that it would all start piling up. I had to get to a better place. I had to get to higher ground. Staring at the closest tree near me, I knew that that would be the ideal place. It would give me some breathing room and get me away from the stupid blank faces that looked at me. And making my way through the crowd of myself, I slowly moved towards my goal. It was a hard and unbearable task, just like getting up from the ground, but through the pain of being forcefully cloned, I managed to get to the base of the nearest tree. Pushing away the clones there, I vented out some of my frustration and anger by shoving them away hard. And then after a new set of my clones had separated from me, I used their bodies to help me up towards the closest branch on top of me. With only one good hand, climbing that tree was difficult, but with the determination that I managed to gather at the time, I knew that I could do almost anything, as long as it meant getting away from myself. Slowly but surely climbing up the tree, each set of clones that split from me ended up falling onto the forest bed below. I had to be careful not to share their fate though, so I made sure to time each movement correctly, being sure to get up the next branch just after the clones split from me. If I failed to do that, the pain of being replicated might make me lose my grip. Falling to the ground wouldn't have been a bad fate if it meant death, but with a sea of clones on the forest floor, I feared I would only end up with more broken bones. If that happens, I would probably end up permanently stuck there and eventually piled on by my own clones. That was a fate that I wanted to avoid as much as possible. So I made my way up carefully, not rushing myself as I got higher and higher. My goal was to reach the top, but with the tree being so high, it was going to take a while to get there. Because of that, I decided to take a break whenever I found a large and sturdy branch. After I was sure that it was secure and wouldn't tip over, I sat there and allowed myself some rest, at least as much rest as I could get from the pain that I was forced to go through. As I sat during those breaks, I looked down below to the mass of clones at the bottom of the tree. In the darkness and from atop the trees, they seemed to have blurred into one blob. Joining them were the new clones that tore off from me, who fell from my skin and tumbled down, hitting various branches before landing atop the pile of replicas below. Following one of those many pauses in my climb, I prepared myself to get up to the next branch when the most recent replication shook me a little harder than the previous one. With my body convulsing, I ended up slipping from the branch. And desperately, I tried to catch myself, but my shaky hand was unable to grab it on time. Time seemed to move slowly during that moment, as I watched myself fall farther and farther away from the branch. Tumbling down, I ended up facing down towards the ground, where other various branches awaited me. If I was lucky, I could perhaps grab or land onto one of them and prevent my continued fall. If not, I would be punctured by each one before I fall into the mass of clones beneath me. However, as I landed on that first branch, something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling it slam onto me, I saw my surroundings suddenly change in the blink of an eye. No longer was I looking at the gloomy sight of my clones piling up below me. They were all gone now and were replaced by a forest bed filled with foliage. As I continued to spin and tumble down, I caught glimpses of the forest and saw that it was more diverse and that it was now shrouded in daylight. I wasn't in that terrible dimension anymore. That branch must have had a hidden link towards another dimension. I had escaped. But there was no time to celebrate though. I may have escaped that dimension of horrors, but I have yet to escape from my fall. Slamming from one branch to another, I grunted in pain before seeing the ground zoom towards me. Closing my eyes, I let out a yell before falling out of consciousness. When I briefly woke up, I found myself looking up at a white ceiling. In a dazed state, I looked around to find myself in a large room, with rows upon rows of hospital beds on either side of me. Focusing on these beds, I saw men strapped on each one of them. My vision was blurry, but I swear that I saw that they all had my face. And then as sudden as I woke up, I passed out again from a sudden surge of pain. The next time I came to, I found myself in a smaller room, a much cozier one. Upon waking up, the attendant there quickly fetched a doctor who greeted me with a smile. From him, I learned that I had been in a coma for over a week. For the most part, much of what he said didn't register in my mind, and deep inside I was too busy being overcome by relief, knowing that I had safely returned to my dimension. I had been lucky, extremely so. Turning my attention back to the doctor, I listened as he went on to explain my present condition. As it turned out, when the organization found me, I was still cursed with that uncontrollable replication. However, it seemed that the rate had drastically slowed down from what it was before, as I only spewed out a clone every 2 hours. Whether it was because I was no longer in the dimension that I was cursed in, I don't know. What I did learn, though, was that the organization had somehow cured me. Through an experimental method that apparently involved radiation and some other ancient machinery that they apparently had in their possession. The doctors and scientists managed to reverse my uncontrollable affliction. Hearing that sounded like music to my ears. I no longer had to go through the terrible pain of having myself cloned repeatedly. After the doctor explained everything that he needed to, he told me to get some rest before making his way out of the room. Just as he was walking out, though, I asked him what had happened to the rest of my section. And Jonathan and Catherine were nowhere to be found in the dimension that I entered, while Rachel and Henry never followed me in. I was extremely worried about what befell all 4 of them. The doctor's expression didn't look too positive. "We were never able to recover their bodies," he simply said, and that was enough to tell me what had happened. I spent the next month in observation and recovery. During that time, I learned from friends in other sections of the exploration team that the whole team was being disbanded. Apparently, the organization managed to engineer some kind of organic robot to take our place. This disappointed many in the team, but I didn't care. At least it meant that I no longer had to go back into another foreign dimension ever again. However, there was one more thing they said that concerned me. More of the staircases had been appearing in forests, with each new one materializing farther and farther from the facility. Just like before, they spawned after the machine activated all by itself, which was becoming a frequent occurrence. Given the disaster our section and a few other sections experienced when exploring these wild staircases, the organization was apparently giving up on them. Labeled as too dangerous without any benefits, the organization would instead stick to exploring the controlled ones inside the facility only. The ones that appeared outside would be marked for burning in an attempt to destroy them and to stop people from climbing up them themselves. But still, some seemed to slip through the cracks. That means that there are probably many staircases left unattended, free for any hiker or camper to stumble upon. If any of these people decided to play around with them and climb up the stairs, they might just end up in another dimension, one filled with horrors that they were never meant to see and harm that they were never meant to experience. And because of this, I want to give you all a warning. If you find a set of stairs in the middle of the woods, don't go up them. Be careful and burn them instead. Today's episode is sponsored by Uncommon Goods. The countdown is officially on. The holiday shopping season is here. Uncommon Goods takes the stress out of gifting with thousands of unique, high-quality finds that you won't see anywhere else. I was browsing their site the other night and found this, the Where It All Began couple art piece. It's handmade, totally customizable, and provides a beautiful portrait of the place where you and your significant other met. It's a great gift for your partner because it's meaningful and it's fun to look back on where it all began. And that's what makes Uncommon Goods so special. They find products that are actually uncommon. Many are made by independent artists or small businesses, so every gift feels one of a kind. And seriously, they've got something for everyone. Moms, dads, kids, book lovers, history buffs, foodies, gardeners, you name it. Thousands of new gift ideas you won't find anywhere else. Plus, when you shop at Uncommon Goods, you're supporting small creators. And with every purchase, they give back $1 to a nonprofit partner of your choice. They've already donated over $3.1 million. So don't wait, and cross those names off your list before the rush. To get 15% off your next gift, go to uncommongoods.com/MrCreeps. That's uncommongoods.com/MrCreeps for 15% off. Uncommon Goods, we're all out of the ordinary. Let's consider some hypotheticals. Let's say you got yourself a master's degree. Let's say that got you a job at a small branch of state government. Let's say you worked there for the better part of your early adult life. You built everything around that job. Got an apartment, moved in with your girlfriend, had an orange cat with seemingly a single brain cell. Life is good, right? Hypothetically. And then along comes this man. Says he works in conjunction with the federal government and the private sector. The guy reeks corporate, got a suit with a custom cut, no labels on his clothes. Tells us that we're going to be working closely with a small department that has recently got a boost. Apparently there's a need for expansion, and some people from my branch will be moving on up. Let's say that one of those people is me, hypothetically. Alright, I'm gonna stop that. Sorry, this gets to me. You can safely presume that I've changed a couple of details to make myself less recognizable. I gotta get through the filters. I had to move from Milwaukee up to Superior. Sarah and I tried to make it work, but she couldn't leave the city behind. It came down to the choice between me and the rest of her life. It made sense for her to stay. Kinda pissed that she kept the cat though, that thing loved me. I started working at the Duck in September of 1998. At first, I didn't even know what the acronym stood for. It wasn't a matter of secrecy, but they had these stupid sayings plastered along the walls that people followed to a T. For example, water off a duck's back. This was the standard operating procedure. Don't ask too many questions. Let your questions and worries drift right off like water off a duck's back. They displayed this proudly in the lunchroom, with a picture of a duck peacefully sleeping by a pond. We worked in collaboration with other agencies in Michigan, Iowa, and Minnesota, mostly Minnesota. I helped them develop software to codify reports of invasive ecological species. It would break down verbal reports with a bare-bones text-to-speech system, which in turn is transcribed and separated into categories. Categories were measured, analyzed, and turned into probability reports. Once information had been categorized, the most prominent reports would be sent to the department lead. It seems simple by today's standards, but back then it was cutting-edge stuff. It was November 1999 when we finalized the first version of our system, lovingly named Daisy. Hours before the launch party, the department lead took me into his office, closed the blinds, and sat quietly across from me for about 2 solid minutes. This man, the department lead, was Thomas Rubin, a 67-year-old ex-drill sergeant with a penchant for the dramatic. It kept his head as bald as his lies. Having worked there for over a year, I thought that I had a foot in the door by then. Turns out I was still on the outside until that very moment. Thomas poured me a shot, a mint schnapps. "To a job well done," he said, raising his glass. I accepted the invitation and downed the shot. What the hell, right? "Do you have any reoccurring nightmares?" he asked. "Seeing something strange at night? Those last few hours before the sunrise, do the shadows gain a peculiar tint?" "No, sir." "You're not a very haunted man, are you?" "I am not, sir." "I can work with that." He poured me another drink. "I can get you working on the real deal," he said. "But you're not gonna like it. You're not gonna like it one bit. That sound like a party to you?" I took the glass and studied it. Little sugar crystals swirling around, backlit from a lone computer screen. I downed the second shot and Thomas smiled. "Imagine a lighthouse," he said, "and whenever somebody thinks about the lighthouse, it lights up. You with me so far?" "Yes, sir." "And this lighthouse draws in all kinds of things from far and wide. Traders, smugglers, warships, everything. But you don't want that. The beach is closed and these ships are bad news. What do? We turn off the lighthouse, sir. But it comes right back on whenever somebody thinks about it, even when you do it." "We demolish the lighthouse, sir." Same thing, it pops right back up once you think about it. Try again." "We forget about it, sir." "You can't unknow something." "Well, then you would have to go after the people that know about it, and you would have to be careful not to learn anything about it yourself." "And that's what we do," said Thomas. "We turn off the lighthouses." Thomas elaborated over the course of 3 more shots. What he was describing was an invasive ecological agent, something that literally grew from the ground. Its very presence acts as a sort of go-ahead for other more dangerous entities, but thinking about it too much causes it to appear. Not immediately, but slowly over time. The more you knew, the more intimate your knowledge about it was, the stronger the connection would be. I was safe though. You had to know the details to trigger it. Thomas gave me the example of a red lily. You couldn't just know that it was red or a lily. You had to know both these things to imagine it clearly. Once you did, there's a chance that it starts appearing more and more in your everyday life, until it takes on a physical form. And by then you've opened an express highway to something far darker and far worse. The Docker, the Department for Unknown Crisis, was found to combat these entities in a way that doesn't endanger the general populace. We were preventative mostly. The software that we made scrubbed away all details and simply stated an address, sometimes a person, and the likelihood of there being at least one physical manifestation of the invasive species present. As the system was automated, there was no way for us to know the details. Only the computer knew. According to Thomas, there was a time when these things had been completely eradicated. Right before the start of the Second World War, there had been a concentrated effort to remove them. The methods they used was later adapted in creation of the duck. Turns out, those things can't ever be truly removed. And there was an author who had documented these ecological entities to such a degree that it could be used as a gateway. While he passed away in 1926, possibly as part of the containment, his diaries were discovered in the 60s. Since then, the invasive species had free reign with nobody to stop them. And there had been some loose efforts, mostly from the private sector, but it took the creation of the duck to start the work on a larger scale. And there we were. From that point forward, I started to work with more specific field equipment, since being able to imagine the object is something that triggers it to manifest. We needed a way for field agents to physically remove them without putting themselves in danger. We came up with something that we called the Blur Guard, a full headset that removes all color, dampens sound, and mildly blurs your vision. And going back to the example of a red lily, the Blur Guard turned it from a red lily to some kind of flower. That's not enough detail to trigger a manifestation, and thus deemed safe. Since our software knew what to look for, we incorporated a camera and basic image recognition. There would be a little green light showing up whenever what we were looking for was in view. And from that point on, our field agents could play hot or cold until they found what they were supposed to remove. And when it came to people, well, we can't kill them or have them unlearn something. So instead, there was a targeted effort to herd them into place where we knew this problem was prominent enough to go unnoticed. The duck had done it for decades. These were personalized, targeted efforts. Maybe sending a very juicy job offer, enticing a target to move, things like that. We focused on two main sites, a rural town in Minnesota and one in West Virginia. There were talks of one up in New England, but that was a separate department. These places have been absolutely scrubbed. To this day, you can't even find them on a map. Our colleagues in the private sector bought out pretty much everything there is to own, giving the duck close to full control. It might seem cruel, but most of these people had no idea that they had been manipulated. They lived good lives, and we did our best to turn off as many lighthouses as we could. But in a town like that, some were bound to pop up eventually. Let's skip ahead a couple years. In the summer of 2004, I had been on rotation assisting with the development of new equipment. I was also regularly updating both Daisy and the Blur Guard. We had implemented generalized search filters, looking for the trigger words that Daisy could use, increasing our information input tenfold. Hell, about 90% of forum infrastructure could be breached to censor descriptions of the invasive agents if needed. We had basic bots prowling most major discussion forums to contain eventual spread. One night, I had taken my work home with me to work on a camera light. Some field agents had mentioned image recognition issues in low-light areas where the camera refused to work. So I figured an extra light source would go a long way. I was blasting my work time playlist on my laptop, sipping on my second rum and coke. If I was going to do extra work from home, I might as well make an event out of it. Just short of midnight, it was time to try it out. I turned off the lights, put on the helmet, and checked to see if the camera light auto-activated as instructed. It did. Strange thing though, I was getting a green marker. The helmet was recognizing the invasive element right in front of me. I know my own apartment top to bottom, so I know exactly what I was looking at, blurred helmet or no. I'm obviously not going to describe it to you, but it had the appearance of a household plant, quite large. I had had it in my window for years. For the sake of storytelling, let's call it a red lily, like in Thomas's example. Suddenly it dawned on me. Now I knew what the invasive agent was, I couldn't unlearn it. From that point forward, I was going to be a threat to the department. This was an invitation for red lilies to pop up out of nowhere, possibly making everyone aware of them. But first and foremost, they would be a lighthouse for other things to come. I pulled the lily out of the pot, roots and all, and I shoved it down the garbage disposal. I swear the thing screamed. The empty pot was left on the windowsill. Moments later, my phone rang. Turns out that my blur guard was actively connected to the Daisy system. It had probably sent out a report to the department lead with my name and address the moment it recognized the species. I held my breath at trying to calm down. This was going to spark a series of events. There would be a report, an investigation. I would most likely lose my job and be forced to relocate. No, worse. This was unprecedented. As expected, the call came from Thomas.
"What's going on?"
he asked. I'm working on the internal camera light. I think there's a malfunction.
"We got a positive match on your location."
I know, it's not a big deal, it's nothing,
We're gonna stick to protocol on this one,"
said Thomas.
"Expect 3 field agents on site within 15 minutes. Don't go anywhere."
I pulled my hair. My hand wouldn't stop shaking. I usually get the shakes when I'm losing control. I figured I'd better remove all traces of the plant. Whatever parts were stuck in the garbage disposal and whatever remained in the pot. Except when I looked back up, there was another red lily growing from the pot, almost exactly the same, like it had never left. I can't stress this enough. You can't unlearn things. You can't unremember something. I tried to not think about it, but that just made me think of it more. I fetched a Rubik's Cube from my desk to focus on something else, but as soon as that color showed up, my mind sank back to thinking of it. I got a garbage bag and threw the whole pot in, along with the rest of the garbage. There'd be nothing left. I went room by room looking for anything remotely resembling it, but there was nothing, so I left the apartment, intent on throwing it all away. But see, there's this communal garden project outside of my apartment building, and it was filled with these things. There were dozens of red lilies. My mind blanked and I could feel my pulse rising in my throat. This entire neighborhood could be compromised, possibly more. I couldn't for the life of me remember if the lilies had been there earlier that day, or if it was a reaction to my realization. These things were insidious, and they not only appear when you think about them, but they make a conscious effort to pop up when they're least expected or wanted. I called my landlord Jerry and started pulling up lilies from the community garden with my free hand. Some of them screamed. It was like a tiny wail from a baby. Some of the lilies clung to the dirt, digging their roots deeper. Others came willingly. One of them withered in my hand, giving up completely. When Jerry finally picked up, I was out of breath. I need to ask about the communal garden project, I said. I work with the Department of Fish and Wildlife. There's a bit of an invasive species growing here, and I need to establish a time frame as to when they appeared.
All right.
The red lilies, the community garden lilies, they're actually a dangerous and invasive species. Do you have any idea how long they've been here?
Oh, red lilies. Oh yeah, we've had those for a while.
How long? There was a silence on the other end. Maybe he was thinking about it. I didn't have that kind of time, though. How long, Jerry?
Look, I don't know. 8, maybe 9 years.
I grabbed my hair and pulled. The pain in my scalp had forced me to concentrate. A handful of hairs gave way. Thanks, Jerry. If you see these, throw them away immediately.
I'll do that.
And don't tell anyone. We don't want to, alarm people. I hung up. I was flailing, breaking protocol left and right. I was a breach waiting to be sealed. I was on my knees in the dirt, pulling up red lilies by the handful. One of my neighbors walked past and I could hear her dog whining at the sight of me, or maybe it saw something that I didn't. There was no telling what this would mean. Most breaches that we had encountered was one or two of these things at most. They were usually contained to the Minnesota side of the operation. Them having skipped the state line and latching onto me was alarming. This could prompt a whole new level of response. I knew Thomas had a level black response where termination of lives would be necessary to contain the threat, but we had never employed it. Not yet. But looking around and running the numbers, this might be it. This could be the first time that they would have to kill people, and I would be the first in line. The field agents would be there at any moment. My hands were red and raw from pulling up lilies and stuffing them into the garbage bag. I was so frantic that I grabbed everything that even remotely resembled them. Anything red and anything lily-shaped. I tore up more than half the community garden in 10 minutes flat. I could hear a car coming. I couldn't take any chances. I looked over to the garden again and I couldn't see any of them, and I sprinted to the garbage cans. The moment that I had thrown it all away, I saw headlights turning the corner. I recognized them. I brushed my hands off the best I could and I shoved them in my pockets. A white hatchback with government license plates pulled up, and 3 people got out. I tried to stay calm. I tried to not think about the red lilies. I tried to smile. I could tell that I was looking at Agent Estevez, Young, and Owens. I had worked with these people plenty of times to prep them for excursion. Never to this extent though, and never on this side of the States. They all fixed and activated their blur guard helmets. "A rough night?" asked Estevez. Yeah, I nodded. "Working on an update. The helmet kinda, you know." Sure. We'll just check out the apartment and be on our way. You mind waiting down here?" "No, that's fine." They turned on their image recognition, synced their communications, and gave me a pat on the shoulder. "Hey, we'll be in and out," said Young. "Sorry about the trouble." I watched them ascend the stairway while I stayed out by the garden. I was trying to make sure that nothing popped up. If the agents just up and left, I could come up with a plan. I would tell Thomas eventually, but I had to be clever about it. I had to assess the damage and spread to make sure that I could trigger a quarantine rather than an eradication level response. Still, looking around the apartment complex, there were probably hundreds of people living there. These things could have made their way into every single household, opening the way for pretty much anything. Not that I had the slightest idea of what that might be. I was lost in thought for the better part of half an hour. I mean, what the hell was taking them so long? Had they found one? I walked up the stairway and put my hand on the apartment door. It was quiet. It shouldn't be quiet. I got this sinking feeling like my body heat was leaking out of my feet. My mind started to race with possibilities. Maybe they left, went to the wrong apartment. Maybe they're watching TV on my couch, having a beer, burning a red lily in the tub. Whatever they did, they wouldn't do it quietly. And this was quiet. I pushed the door open and I was met with a chemical smell, like a moist mix of methanol and iron. It was strong enough to taste. "Estevez," I coughed out. "You guys okay in there?" No response. I stepped back out, gasping for fresh air. The smell burned my nose hairs. My eyes teared up as I tried to not sneeze. I didn't want to go back in. I knew that it was bad. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. Still, I didn't have a choice. I stepped back in and shut the door behind me. I turned on the lights. They had been torn to pieces. There was blood dripping from the ceiling, 2 severed arms on the kitchen table, an armless, legless torso resting on the couch, the blood sinking into the cracks in the leather. The floor was covered in it. It was torn straight from their bodies and left in the open. Muscle, sinew, vital organs, all splayed out on the floor and furniture. There was a single red lily in a brand new pot resting on the windowsill. There was a bright red handprint on the bathroom door. I gently pushed the door open, only to reveal the severed heads of Estevez, Young, and Owens, unceremoniously thrown into a pile on the floor of my shower cabinet. I don't know how long I stood there. My mind went completely blank. I could honestly not tell if it was real or a nightmare. For a moment, I was awash with this intense relief. I mean, it had to be a nightmare. It didn't make sense for something so terrible to happen so suddenly. It took me a while to realize that there was something looking at me from the bathroom mirror. I turned to it. My face wasn't there, just a dark space where my face ought to be. It was like staring into a hole, vaguely shaped like a humanoid. It followed my movements as I leaned my head from left to right. We looked at one another in silence, hearing only the blood dripping from the living room ceiling. A trembling whisper burrowed into my spine. "Hello." This was one of the things that Thomas had warned us about. This was one of the ships that came to shore following the lighthouse. One of the countless entities invited into my world, drawn in by this thing, that thing that ought not to be. I hate calling it a red lily. I want to scream what it is and have them torn apart, but I can't describe them or they'll spread out of control. The longer I stared at the thing in the mirror, the more that I understood. It was one thing to know about the red lilies. It was 100 times more potent to know exactly how they worked. For an average person to know their appearance, it might invite a few to pop up, but to know them at the level that I did, that was an entirely different league. To these things, I was precious cargo. I could light 100 lighthouses, maybe 1,000. They perceived Estevez and the other agents as a threat and disposed of them immediately. I was the equivalent of a carrier, patient zero. I was stuck in the eye of the storm and everything around me would be torn to shreds. I ran 100 scenarios in my mind. Destroying myself was the obvious choice, but that would be the nail in the coffin that would force Thomas to take violent action on this entire apartment complex. Without context, he wouldn't know how to contain it. Losing personnel was the final criteria for a black level response. However, if it was attributed to a breach of protocol or faulty equipment, I could bring it down to a quarantine. There was hope, but I had to explain it. I had to stay alive. As I pondered my options, I heard a running motor outside. I stepped out of the bathroom and out onto the walkway. Another 2 white hatchbacks had pulled up. I had lost track of time. No one in Estevez's team had reported an all clear or anything. This had prompted a standard backup response. If these teams found traces of anything, our entire field division would be called in. They'd probably put people all the way down in Des Moines on high alert within the next 15 minutes if there was no de-escalation. There were already new red lilies growing in the community garden too. They wouldn't let me talk. Talking was a hazard, since I could verbally describe what they were looking for. I could yell out, "They look like red lilies," and the entire squad would be compromised. Up until this point, we'd never had to worry about that kind of willful exposure, and there was no plan for it. The duck didn't have enemies in the active sense. We were preventative. There was no way that they would let me talk or leave, not with 3 human remains in my apartment. At best, they would have gagged me and burned this place to the ground. At worst, they'd shoot me and then do the same. I scurried along the walkway, turning left at the far end. I took the fire escape to the ground floor, hugged the wall of the building, and circled back to the parking lot. I burst into a sprint for my sedan. Luckily, no one noticed. At least no one that cared. As soon as I got on the highway, I called Thomas. I had trouble staying in my lane. My hands kept cramping up. Thomas picked up. I could hear him opening a door and putting on a jacket.
You gotta tell me what's going on. Where are you?
I had to go, I had to. The place is infested.
So let's deal with it.
I didn't know what to say. There was no good place to start. I leaned back in my seat and tried to keep the car straight, and I took a deep breath. There were flashes of red by the roadside. It could have been red lilies. The back seat was dark enough to hide a possible shape. I thought that I saw an outline in the rearview mirror, but it might have been my mind playing tricks on me.
Just stay where you are. I'll have somebody pick you up and we'll deal with it.
I can't, I said. It's bad, Thomas. It's real bad.
How bad are we talking?
We're talking, quarantine, breach of protocol. At least 3 casualties. Thomas took a deep breath. He held the line for a few seconds, and I could hear him get into a car.
You know, don't you?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
They're everywhere. I can't stop seeing them.
Don't tell me anything, nothing. I shouldn't be talking to you.
He was right. Talking to someone like me who knew was like trying to pet a rattlesnake. It could all be over in a snap. Hey, we gotta bring you in. What are you gonna do?
Did we lose people?
Estevez's team, I said. Something came through.
Jesus Christ. Are you saying that you're causing manifestations?
I don't know.
But you do know. You, if anyone, knows. So tell me.
Looking back in the rearview mirror, I knew there was something riding along. Something that had caught on to me. Something that had stepped into our world, following the light of the red lilies. There was no point in denying it. I'll figure it out, I said. I'll deal with it. Before Thomas got the chance to object, I turned off my phone and chucked it out the window. I drove for the better part of an hour before a familiar sound snapped me to attention. Whatever surface-level plans that I had made in my head dissolved completely. I heard the sound before I saw the flashing lights. A siren. I was probably swerving left and right, trying to keep the car straight. No wonder I was being pulled over. This could get bad, like real bad, real fast. I thought about booking it and hoping for the best, but that would only draw more attention to me. Instead, I found a secluded spot and I pulled over. It was only as I pulled the handbrake that I remembered that I had been drinking earlier that night. I had had about 2 rum and cokes. I had completely forgotten about them. I tried to consider my options, but there was no time. I was told to turn off the engine, roll down the window, and place my hands on the dashboard. There were 2 officers, a man and a woman. I could barely hear them over my pounding heart. To them, it was a routine stop, but I was trying to save lives. They had no idea what kind of trouble they were in. I tried to wrap my head around it to come up with something plausible that they would understand. I could tell them that I had a bomb strapped to me, or anything, but there was no time. I hadn't even heard them asking for my license and registration. I could feel a flashlight shine on my face, but I barely registered it. They asked me 3 times and then they changed tactics. Sir, we need you to step out and place your hands on the hood of the vehicle. I fumbled my response. There's something in the car. You gotta be careful, Sir, is there currently a weapon on your person? Something that can puncture or wound my partner? A pencil, a knife, a sharp set of keys. No, listen, you gotta step back. There's something in. My thoughts blanked. There by the side of the road, I saw one. A red lily as clear as day, growing through the cracks in the pavement. "Sir, I need you to cooperate with me," the officer insisted. "Have you been drinking tonight?" I couldn't take my eyes off the red lily. It was like a reminder that this was already over, that my fate and theirs was sealed the moment that we met. Dead men walking. "Please," I whispered, "let them go." For a second, I thought that might do it. I was willing to listen, to give in, if that's what it took for these people to live. The red lily knew. I know that it knew. But like a lighthouse, it can't help but to shine, and to bring ships to shore. And with that, a familiar tremble rose in my stomach. "Hello." There was a flicker as one of the light posts went out. I closed my eyes, trying to keep the tears in. The officer to my left started screaming. I heard a gunshot, but muffled, as it fired into something at close range. I heard fabric being torn, and then flesh, and then sinew and arteries. No one had ever told me that it was possible to discern the sound of marrow separating from breaking bone, but now I can't stop hearing it. Hello. Primal, animalistic screams, a programmed response in our biology to alert other humans to stay away, to run. Splotches of blood rained down on the concrete in the hood of the car. I could feel something warm spatter across my face and run down my cheeks. The scream stopped. I had sunk to my knees. I looked like a crying altar boy praying for it all to stop. When I finally forced my eyes open, the world was red with blood. In the flicker of a dying light post, I saw something vaguely human drop the sundered remains of a torso. It followed my head movements left to right, mimicking me. I could tell that it was proud, like a dog bringing a stick to its master. Hello. I stumbled to my feet, leaning against the car to steady myself. The concrete was slippery with blood, and I kept stepping on something indiscernible. I tried to look straight ahead as to not look at the entity too closely. It was just standing there in the middle of the street looking at me, waiting for me to say or do something. I looked straight ahead, pretending that it wasn't even there. The car took a few turns of the key to start. The steering wheel was slippery with blood, but I managed to steer back on the road. The windshield wipers smeared the mess into a thin red veneer. I had to go away, far away, and there was only one place that I could imagine. As I mentioned earlier, the dock had certain containment areas. Previously, these were spaces where they simply moved people of interest. But with me there, they would have to leave it alone. I would be too dangerous to interact with. They would have to trust that I wouldn't interfere as long as I kept to myself and out of the way. I burned my car in a field and I walked 9 miles. I washed myself off in a river. This was a town designed to keep people comfortable enough to not ask questions, so having a stranger wander in off the streets wouldn't be a problem. And everywhere I looked, there were red lilies. They were in the windows of every house, by the roadside, in every garden. Hell, they were even used as a logo. I had seen that logo 100 times. Maybe they had no idea what it meant. I've stayed in that rural Minnesota town ever since. I've seen more horrors than I dare to count, but they seem to ignore me. They treat this place as a nesting ground or a staging area. Considering how many of them there is, I'm astounded that anybody is still alive. Duck has declared this entire town to be a hazard. I've tried getting in touch with Thomas again, but all my attempts at communication with the outside world has been censored. If this by some miracle gets through the filters, I urge the Duck to get in contact with me. I want to be an asset. I want to help in turning off the lighthouses. And as for everyone else, the best thing you can do is to stop asking questions. Don't question the armed men with strange helmets. Don't look too closely at the strange plant in the community garden. Don't look for anything abnormal. And if you see something, try to consider it might be artificial. Don't dig too deep into this. If you're not involved, consider yourself lucky. And stay out of rural Minnesota. Today's episode is sponsored by Saturdead. At first, the clues don't seem connected. A bill here, a fee there, but step back and the pattern becomes clear. Credit card debt. It's the suspect hiding in plain sight. It doesn't kick down your door or shout your name, it follows you quietly like a shadow. And just when you think you're safe, it strikes. The evidence, locked accounts, wages gone, futures rewritten. But here's the twist, you can escape. Saturdead has already helped hundreds of thousands break free, and they can help you too. Whether it's credit cards, personal loans, or medical bills, Saturdead creates a custom plan built just for you, one that goes beyond the numbers to understand your unique situation. There's no minimum credit score required. They're here to help you save more and pay off debt faster, and finally start putting money back where it belongs, into your pocket. If you're ready to stop running from your debt and start fighting back, reach out to Saturdead today. If I had needed this product, it's what I would use. Because the sooner you act, the sooner you can take control of your story and leave the shadow behind. Don't wait for debt to make its next move. You're 30 seconds away from being debt-free. Get your free assessment and find the best option for you right now at pdsdat.com/MrCreeps. That's pdsdat.com/MrCreeps. pdsdat.com/MrCreeps. Peter, can you even see anything up there? Harry, the oldest yet least mature forest ranger, said over the two-way. High on my perch in Tower 3, I had a full 360-degree view of the national forest that stretched out to the horizon. This was a dumb joke that he liked to ask every time that I drew the short straw for this position. Yeah, vision is clear. No smoke, no fires. No adverse weather conditions. Cool, hey, can you see me flipping the double bird to you? He said this so often that I mouthed the words as he spoke. Harry, like stress or radiation, was fine in small doses, but God help you if you have to have a weekend shift with the man. That's a negative, I said. How's campsite duty? Oh, slow, there are like 5 campers here and 2 of them are hosts. Filth Hat Jack is back as host of the Western Loop. Can't stand that dude. Oh, he's not bad. A little gruff, but once you break through, well, he's still a little gruff. I said, trying and failing to find something nice to say about Filth Hat Jack. Gruff like those goats from the fairy tale. Weren't they devils or sold to the devil or tricked a devil? Oh, I'm not up to date with my billy goat folklore. It's why they put you up in the tower. Meanwhile, the rest of us grounders are thinking of playing poker later. Ground squirrels, or grounders, was the nickname that Harry made up for anyone not working in a lookout tower during their shift. It never made sense to me. Squirrels can climb trees, which are nature's towers, but the name stuck. Tower dwellers were named after the high-flying sandhill cranes, which inevitably got shortened to sandies. Oh, you all suck at poker, I said. You have to be able to bluff and lie to win. All the people on grounder duty are basically priests. Now me, I can spin yarns like the best of them. Hey Nitnuts, why don't you spin me a yarn about how you lost $100 last time you played? Guys, these two-way radios are for emergencies, Gwen said, her voice sounding more exasperated than usual. She was another Sandy set up in Tower 5 about 20 miles northwest of me. She had gifted kid vibes, which made sense, as she had been one and was easily annoyed with the rest of us. But everybody loved her, and deep down she loved us too. But like really deep down. Called John Hammond, we found insects in ancient amber deep. "Gwenny," Harry said, dragging out her name. "You promised not to play school marm today. George is gone for the week. Let's enjoy a boss-free day." Gwen sighed. "One, I never promised anything, and two, you know that I hate Gwenny. And three, I was a troll in the Three Billy Goats Gruff legend," she said before adding, "Oh, and four, you are the absolute worst poker player in camp, Peter." "Boom," Harry said. I couldn't see him doing his bullhorn's hand charging at you move, but I knew that he was doing it. The man was in his 50s, he had kids in college. Everyone knows Bud. Yeah, Gwen is right. These two-ways are for official business only. Sandy 3, out. "Have fun with Filth Hat Jack," Gwen said. Sandy 5, out. "I'll pray no sudden thunderstorms come rolling in," Harry said with a laugh. "Grounder 1, over and out, baby. Suck my butt." Again, this man has a mortgage. When I'm on tower duty, I always bring a book or two. When you're up in the gentle rocking and quiet of the air, you can get a lot of reading done. I'm currently going through a series of horror movie tie-in novelizations. I just finished Alien and The Fog and was looking forward to The Blob. I wanted to do a run of 40s pulp detective novels next. No, I don't have a girlfriend. Why do you ask? Anyway, after about an hour, my two-way came to life. "Sandy 3, this is Sandy 5, do you copy?" And Gwen was always so formal. "Sandy 3 to Sandy 5, I copy." "Hey Pete, you get any emergency calls in the last 10 or so minutes?" "Negative. What's up?" The cabin's two-way started squawking a bit ago. First it was just static, but then, well, it kind of sounded musical. Musical, how? Sounded like a kid's piano playing Mary Had a Little Lamb, I think at least. It repeated a few times before going silent. Maybe radio signals bleeding through. I thought that at first too, but I haven't heard anything since. Maybe you have a fan out there that really wanted you to hear the rendition of a childhood favorite. If anyone knows I'm up here, I'm already in trouble. No one is scheduled to come out this way today. I wouldn't go speaking that out into the wider world, Gwen. Oh, I'm not alone, Pearl is here with me. We're attached at the hip, you know. Pearl was what she called her pistol. All of us carried something when we went out into the wild. In my civilian life, I'm not much of a gun guy. Out here, though, I understand that it's an important tool in my tool bag. Don't want to be cornered by a wild cat and not have something to scare it away. Oh, Pearl is a straight shooter after all. The best. Let me know if you hear anything, huh? My intuition is pecking at me. Roger. If it comes back, try to record some of it with your phone. Oh, that's a good idea. Sometimes we non-gifted Sandys stumble into one. I regret telling you that all the flippin' time, Pete. Sandy 5, out. Sandy 3, over and out. I hung up the microphone and walked over to the north-facing window. If the weather is clear, I can sometimes make out Tower 5 from here. It takes a minute to spot, but I always can because, as the old saying goes, there are no straight lines in nature. While not technically true, it's mostly true and a useful guide for spotters. The difference between Mother Nature and her wayward child, mankind. I scanned the horizon for anything out of the ordinary, but everything looked serene. This view never changes, but it also never disappoints. The number of hours that I've sat out on the catwalk just staring out at the natural world would astound you. To work as a ranger, you have to have not just a healthy fear and appreciation for the wild, but genuinely love it. I heard electronic squelches behind me and turned to see some of the lights on the cabin's two-way lighting up. I walked back over, picked up the handle, and spoke. Sandy 3, come back. Static broke through the speakers, but that was it. No words and no childhood songs, nothing but grating static. I waited a bit to see if anybody would respond, but after 2 minutes of staring at the speaker, I determined it was nothing. I kicked back in my chair and dove back into my paperback. 2 pages later, Gwen came back. "Sandy 3, this is Sandy 5. I groaned as I sat back up and grabbed the microphone. "And go for it, Sandy 3. "Peter, do you see something in the sky? North, northwest." Trailing the long, coiled cord behind me, I walked to the window and looked in the direction that she told me. I held my hand over my eyes to shield any glare, but I still didn't see anything. I pressed the button. "Negative, can't see anything. What is it?" "I don't know, I was knitting and I heard something whoosh over the tower. Sometimes small planes zip closer than they should, but when I looked out I didn't see anything. At first. And then about 10 or so miles out, the sun reflected off of something silver in the sky. A chopper? Sometimes the fire guys do test runs on clear days. Nothing on the schedule. I tried raising them on the radio, but nobody responded." "Well, that wasn't ideal. You want the fire brigade to answer a call. That goes double if you're surrounded by living firewood. A spark could start an inferno that could eat through the entire forest at a speed that would make your head spin. You want me to try to hail them?" "Yes," she said. Her usually firm voice wavered a little. "Pete, this thing is just hovering in the sky. Sometimes they'll do a training run without informing us. It's rare, but it happens. That has to be it. It has to be." "Has to be," she echoed. "Give me a second. Let me switch frequencies and call. I'll come right back. Sandy 5 out." I gave the sky another glance, but I didn't see anything hovering. I knew Gwen. She was as straight a shooter as Pearl. If she had said she saw something, she saw it. I flipped over to the fire emergency frequency and depressed the button. "This is National Forest Lookout Tower 5. Does anybody copy?" Silence. I tried again and again, but nothing. I flipped to a few more frequencies and didn't get a reply. It was like they were ignoring us. I switched back to Gwen and filled her in. She wasn't happy. "What the hell? What's going on? What if there's a fire? Is the thing still in the sky? Yeah, it's not moving. It feels like I'm being watched. What's the bearing on your Osborne?" The Osborne is a fire detecting tool equipped within every cabin. It's used to determine a location relative to the tower. It swivels 360 degrees and has an accurate topographical map at its center. When you sight smoke, you line up the crosshairs and find the degrees along the side. It's accurate enough with one tower, but more so if other towers can center in and cross-reference each other. 329 degrees in 48 minutes, Gwen said. "Let me know what you see." I moved the Osborne to the bearing and took a gander through the crosshairs. My eyes are trained to follow along the ridges, so it took a second for me to adjust to the sky. At first, I didn't see anything with my naked eye. Then I did notice the sun glint off something. "Oh, Gwen, I see it. Barely, but there's something there. So I'm not crazy." "Well, that remains to be seen. But with this, you're good." "I don't like that I can't get through to fire and rescue. That's never happened before." "Try your cell phone. Maybe you can reach them that way." "I tried. No signal. I usually have a few bars out here, but not now." "Always when you need it the most, right?" "Yeah, no kidding." "Pete, this thing is dropping." "Falling or landing?" "Both. It's a quick, controlled descent. You see it?" I didn't. I had barely seen it in the air. If it was quickly falling out of the sky, I had no chance of seeing a thing. Negative. Crap, it just dipped behind the tree line. I'm filling out a smoke report. I don't know what else to do except follow protocol. Let me try to give them a call on my phone. I had a signal earlier. Hold on. I pulled my phone out ready to dial, but noticed that I didn't have any service. It wasn't even roaming. Just blank, like the cell towers had been erased. I tried restarting my phone, but it didn't change anything. I don't have service either, I said into the two-way. Any changes over there? I heard Gwen hit the button to speak, but she didn't say a word. Instead, I listened to her handheld two-way radio click several times, and sure enough, the beginning of Mary Had a Little Lamb had started playing. Finally, she whispered, "Are you hearing this?" "I am." The song suddenly stopped, and a calm, almost robotic voice started to speak. Gwen and I stayed quiet as churchgoers as the voice said, 777 Alpha Omega 6, unknown, unknown, unknown. Repeat, 777 Alpha Omega 6, unknown, unknown, unknown. The voice stopped and my heart did as well. Seconds later, the tinny version of Mary Had a Little Lamb started playing again. What is that? Who is sending that out? It sounds like a code, like from a number station. Number station as in secret messages to spies. Those number stations. Spies or government officials, maybe. I'm just guessing. It could be someone's idea of a weird prank. Maybe it's the fire and rescue teams messing with us. "Oh, I dated a guy in fire and rescue," Gwen said. "They don't have an ounce of a sense of humor shared among them. I think this is legit and I think it's bad. It sounds like a warning and I don't think it's a coincidence it came after this thing showed up and landed. Gwen, we don't know what's going on. I think writing the report is a good idea. You want me to relay a message to the campsites? Get another ranger out there. Maybe you'll get lucky and Terry will get dispatched," I said, trying to lower the tension. Gwen may have sounded calm to the untrained ear, but I knew she was scared, or at the very least, unnerved. I was as well, but I didn't want to share that. She laughed, but it sounded like it was Texas two-stepping with crying. "And do you know that he told me the other day that he thought, if given 6 months of training, he could make the Pro Bowler tour, with nothing but alley balls. Maybe we should encourage it and give our ears a break. Actually," he said, "I could throw cheese like a pissed-off Wisconsinite, Gwenny," she said, imitating his voice. "That man has kids in college, Gwen," I said. "That man watched 9/11 as it happened," she said. "Oh, that's a good one." Our conversation was cut short when we both heard a low rumble and felt a slow-rolling earthquake shake our towers. I grabbed onto my table as the entire cabin rocked back and forth, like a ship hit by a rogue wave. After what felt like 10 hours but was actually just 30 seconds, the shaking stopped. "Gwen, are you okay?" "Jesus Christ, I think I heard something in the tower snap." "What?" "I don't know, I was worried this whole thing was gonna fall over. Was that an earthquake?" "It felt like it." "When the hell has there ever been an earthquake here?" As I made a mental note to look up if this area had ever had a recorded earthquake, I noticed the trees about a mile out violently snap back and forth in a concentric circle, like someone had dropped a pebble in the water. The ring of shaking trees quickly spread out, and I felt the concussive wave before I heard it. Again, the tower shuddered from the blast. The northern window shattered, and bits of glass came flying inward. I ducked under the desk with the cabin two-way to avoid Swiss cheesing my body, but several of the shards caught my arm. I winced in pain as the glass bit into my flesh. Not wanting to bleed out, I ripped off the sleeve of my shirt and did my best to staunch the bleeding. Once the blast had passed, I shot up and turned to the southern window. You could physically see the concussive wave working its way through the trees toward the campsites. "Gwen, are you good?" No response. "Gwen, please come back, over." Nothing. Panic started to set in. If she were near the epicenter of that blast, there was a good chance her tower could have collapsed. She could be hurt or well. I didn't want to think that. I tried a third time with no response. My personal two-way squawked. It was Harry calling. He sounded equally nervous and confused. Sandy 3, this is Grounder 1. What was that? I don't know. Are you safe? I think so, but I can't get a hold of Gwen. Oh, crap. Did you see anything, any smoke? She saw something hovering in the sky that went down near her tower. We tried reaching out to fire and rescue, but they didn't respond. Something was hovering in the sky. Did I hear that right? Affirmative. It went down or landed. We also heard an odd. The cabin's two-way started to chirp. I turned up the speakers and heard clicking and growling. At first it sounded random, but then I realized multiple things were clicking and growling. It was as if they were communicating with each other. There was a loud, high-pitched electronic squeal that made me slam my hands over my ears. It went on for 10 seconds, and I heard the rest of the glass in the cabin window crack but not fall. When it stopped, I uncovered my ears, but that still didn't chase away the cobwebs. It sounded like my head had been underwater. My ears were swimming. I shook my head and used my thumb to pump at the opening in my ear to help pop them. I heard Harry yelling into my personal two-way. He was jabbering and I had a hard time making out what he was saying. I took a second, centered myself and listened. Jesus, Peter, can you hear me? Copy. Christ on a bike, what took you so long to respond? I heard something on the cabin two-way. It sounded like someone clicking or what I imagined crickets would sound like if they could talk. Crickets talking? Son, did you hit your head? The cabin's two-way speaker came back to life. More clicking, but this was deliberate, as if it was signaling to someone. It sounded familiar, and I had no idea how that was even possible. At first, I couldn't make out what it was, but then it dawned on me. It was parroting back, "Mary had a little lamb." The hell? I said, staring at the speaker. I glared at the little box, wishing it could transform into a TV screen and show me what was making that noise. And that's when I saw the object rise above the tree line and climb up into the blue sky. It waited a beat and then zipped towards me. "Oh no," I said, diving under the desk. At speeds I didn't think possible, the craft whooshed over the tower, making it rattle to the foundations. Harry was going nuts over my two-way, rambling about something, but I didn't pay it any attention. Instead, I ran out into my catwalk to see where this craft had gone to, if it was still even possible. As fast as it was traveling, it might be halfway around the world by now. As soon as I pushed open the door to the catwalk, the air around me felt heavy. It even made my moments slow like astronauts walking on the moon. I wondered if hopping would make me move quicker. I glanced up and everybody in my vision was wavy like when you see gas fumes in the daylight. There was nothing above me that I could see, but I knew it was there. That meant it would have to stop on a dime to be here. Nothing I knew could do that. From inside the cabin, the speakers started bleeding out feedback. At first, it was just noise, but it morphed into something that I had been hearing all day. Mary had a little lamb. It made me realize that it was mirroring the message that it must have heard at the same time Gwen and I had. In an instant, the song stopped, and the air around me returned to normal. Whatever had been lingering around was gone. Harry was calling out from my personal two-way. I ran back inside and picked it up. "Peter, do you copy?" "Copy," I said. "Jesus, what's happening out there?" Before I could answer, my eyes flicked towards the north window, and I saw a thin ribbon of smoke in the horizon. It looked dangerously close to Gwen's tower. I felt my heart start to race. "Harry, there's smoke near Tower 5. I can't call Gwen, and fire and rescue aren't picking up." "Say no more. I'll grab the UTV and head out. You have a bearing on the Osborne for me." I glanced up to where I had seen the curl of smoke, but an entire bolt of smoke had replaced the ribbon. Or honestly, more like a thick pea soup fog had stretched for about a mile and was still going. No fire spreads that quickly. It reminded me of those snake fireworks that always underwhelmed you as a kid. You light a small black circle and as it ignites, it expands. At best, it coiled until it became a puff of nothing and blew away in the breeze. At worst, it stopped coiling after about 10 seconds and left a burn mark on your driveway. I had no idea what was going on here. "Jesus, Harry, I don't know what this is, but I'm not sure it's a fire." "Where is it?" "Across the horizon," I said, "and it's growing." "What?" The cabin's two-way came to life. Through the speaker, we heard a pre-recorded message from the Secretary of Agriculture, the person who oversees all the national parks. In a calm and measured tone, they said, "Rangers, this is a code black warning. Please remain in place and do not interfere with any military officials who may arrive on scene. If there are civilians present, please inform them that they are to remain in place and cannot leave. Anyone found fleeing this location will be considered hostile and subject to severe punishments. Repeat, this is a code black warning. Stay in place and do not interfere with any military officials. Thank you for your cooperation." It came and went like a mid-afternoon storm. I wasn't sure what the smoke or fog was, but I was certain it wasn't just a quickly spreading forest fire. This was something different. A gas attack, a small-scale nuclear device, a dimensional rift. My mind was racing. "Harry, what the hell is a code black?" "I got no idea." "Why would they send out the military?" "Whatever the reason, it ain't good, kid. I gotta go get Gwen. If she's at the epicenter of this, who knows if she's still." He didn't finish, but we both knew what he meant. I had thought nothing but that since she had stopped responding. Yeah, go, just go, be safe, Harry." "Oh, you know me, safety's my middle name. That and Big Dong," he said, trying to add levity to the tense situation. I gave Harry crap, but that was his true value. He cared about our well-being. I appreciated the attempt, but we were both too scattered to laugh. Grounder 1 out. I walked back out to the catwalk and stared out at the approaching fog. It was so thick that, as it slowly advanced, the trees would just disappear from view. I thought about Gwen and my guts twisted into pretzels. I had been concerned that the tower collapsed earlier, but now that seemed quaint. Was she still alive? Had whatever the code black warning entailed harmed her? The pace at which the fog was approaching was increasing. I'd reluctantly have answers to those questions before too long. I swallowed hard and ran my hands through my sweaty hair. I wanted to do something to help, but I had no idea what I could even do. Would the military arrive soon? Would I be pressed into service? The cabin's two-way started squawking again, and then I heard a familiar voice whisper through the speaker. "Sandy 3, this is Sandy 5. Do you copy?" "Gwen." I ran back inside and nearly ripped the two-way off the wall by yanking on the microphone. Gwen, are you okay? What's going on?" "Peter, I can't say much. They may hear me." "Who?" "The creatures in the fog." I fell back down on the ground. I had a hard time breathing. The what?" "There are dozens of them and they're multiplying." "What are they?" "Shh, don't speak," she whispered. "I hear some at the base of the tower." I held my breath, praying that she had closed and locked the access to the catwalk. If they went up into the tower, Gwen had nowhere to go. My heart raced and I felt like I might pass out. I drummed on the floor, praying that I would hear Gwen's voice again. "They haven't figured out that I'm in here yet," she whispered. "So far, they've stayed out of the tower." I wanted to respond, but I knew my voice coming out of her speaker would be a beacon that led to her. I stayed quiet. She had kept her finger depressed on the microphone button, and I could hear everything going on in her cabin. I wasn't sure if she had actually held it down or if she wanted to leave a record of what happened to her. I heard Gwen's heavy breathing and the occasional rustling of her clothes. I imagined she was tucked under the desk, the long cord trailing from the wall. Sweat beaded my forehead and poured down my face. Seconds later, I heard something that chilled me. It was the clicking and growling noises that I had heard earlier. There were dozens of different ones in the distance. These things had surrounded the tower. Jesus, I think I hear one on the stairs. Lock the catwalk door, Gwen. Please tell me you've locked it, I said to myself. As long as she had the microphone in her death grip, none of my messages would reach her. She was smart, and I was hoping she did the smart thing. Peter, I don't know what's going to happen, but thank you for always being nice to me. Tell Harry the same, dumb jokes and all. But between you and me, the man has personal knowledge of the country's mood during the 2008 housing crisis. Tears formed at the corners of my eyes, but I smiled. Yeah, good one, Gwen. I'm not saying this is goodbye. I still have Pearl with me, but in case, Jesus, there are more of them on the stairs now. She said, her voice lowering to the point where it was barely audible. I'm scared, Peter. I don't think these things are from. The radio cut off. No noise, no static, no connection with her two-way. I pressed the button and whispered, Gwen, can you hear me? Silence. The cabin's two-way shorted out and died. I ran to my personal two-way but knew that I didn't have the range with it. She was alone, cut off from all humanity. I bolted up and ran to the catwalk. The curtain of fog was inching closer. I thought about Harry driving like a madman towards it with reckless abandon. He needed to turn back, but there was no way to reach him now. My heart ached. That man had a family. With nothing to do but prepare for the approaching wave, I locked the catwalk and moved the sparse furniture towards the open windows, not to stop them from coming but to slow them down in the hopes that the military might have a plan. I pulled out my handgun, loaded it, and watched the fog roll toward me. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if any of us will get out of this alive. I don't know if this can even be stopped. I turned to the southern approach, miles from the darkening fog, and admired the landscape. It really is pretty up here. My cousin once told me a curious thing one time. I don't believe in hell, he said. There is no kind of pain that a person can't get used to or even learn to appreciate. I've thought a lot about that. As long as we have the means to perceive our surroundings, we have the capability to appreciate it. If you've been on the internet long enough, you know what kind of absolutely vile things that people have come to love. I don't believe I'm any different. It started back in 2016. I worked my second year as a lab assistant for a pharmaceutical company, a large Midwestern one with the blue sunflower logo. Lower end of the pay scale, high end of the benefits kind of gig. I didn't have that much going on with my life. It was just this endless cycle of overtime, sleep, and overtime again. I had an apartment on the 3rd floor, a modern place with a huge elevator and reflective glass in the hallways. They had a deal with the company and offered a rent cut for everyone who worked there, making it a sort of corporate hangout spot along with a home. I thought I was going to hate it, but I ended up appreciating it. But there was a fire. I don't know what started it, but it turned the 1st floor into an inferno. I was fresh out of the shower when it had happened, barely covering myself with a towel. The alarms blared, and it was so quick. You can feel the flames eating the air around you before you could feel the heat, a hitch in your throat. It was hot enough for you to get boils by just stepping into the hallway. I tried making my way downstairs while my neighbor across the hall locked himself in his apartment. The last I saw of him, he and his family peeked at me through a closing door, their eyes reflecting the spreading flames from downstairs. I didn't make it far. Everything looked different in the smoke, and I got turned around. I tried to push forward, but it was too late. I knocked on doors, begging for shelter, but no one answered. I ended up in the corner of the hallway, pushed up against the elevator, feeling the heated metal melt the outer skin of my hand. Your throat closes up. You can see heat build on your arms, boils bursting like poxes. And before you pass out, you disassociate. You don't really believe that it's happening. I knew I should have panicked, but I just shrugged it off. It wasn't real. It was like another world, another me. It wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. I had never experienced anything like it in all my life, so it had to be a hallucination. But that's the thing about experiencing something for the first time. You don't realize what it is. That's the best way I can describe it. Dying. I was only out for a couple of seconds, maybe half a minute, before the firefighters found me. They dragged me out and wrapped me in a blanket. I had second-degree burns all over, a third degree in some places. Those hurt less. It burns through the nerves. You don't feel that until you start to recover. Waking up was unreal. I didn't understand that I had been bandaged all over my head. I just thought that they had turned off the lights. I couldn't feel a thing, courtesy of a more than generous corporate health insurance and an even more generous dose of morphine. I remember somebody talking to me, but I could barely hear them on one side. An eardrum had ruptured and my left ear had fused to the side of my hairless head. "Oh, thank God," a voice said. "Thank God you're gonna make it." My little sister Sammy, she had flown in from Ottawa. I was in and out of consciousness for days. I had nightmares about pain and anxiety about the drugs wearing off. Sometimes I would hear machines beeping. Once a nurse changed a bandage and it felt like getting my skin torn off. I remember drawing in a breath to scream and then just gone, blackout. I'd get these glimpses of real life sometimes. Someone humming in the hallway, my sister talking on her phone, a beam of light hitting the bandage across my eye, tickling a damaged membrane. I prayed not to feel anything because I knew that it would just be more pain. Unbearable, mind-numbing agony. Your body turning inside and out, trying to heal everything at once, hitting biological dead ends over and over. I think it was night when somebody came into my room. They talked to Sammy. They sounded apologetic and she cried. And then a little later, somebody else came into the room. They had something else to say. Her tone had changed. Hope. "Please," she said, "whatever it takes." They rolled me into an elevator and then outside. There was a mild breeze that stung like nails on my missing skin. Transport. Sammy calling out in the distance. "We'll take good care of him." The prick of a needle. I couldn't feel a thing. I was out for at least 36 hours. When I came to, I was lying in a hospital bed looking up at the ceiling. No bandages covering my face. A soft gray membrane covering my left eye. I blinked it away and instinctively raised my arm to wipe it off. My arm was covered in a thick, dark ink-like substance. It clung to me like a putty, but I could barely feel it. I had never seen anything like it before. My entire body was covered in it. It was on my face too, and even on my eyes. But it worked as a sort of one-way mirror. It didn't block my vision. The closer you looked, the more translucent it was. I was fine. No pain, no restricted movement. Nothing. I sat up, accidentally pulling a couple of wires from my arm. I looked down at my body only to see that all-covering ink putty dry up and sink into my skin, like morning dew on a dry lawn. I didn't feel a thing, not even a tickle. A nurse came running just moments later, ready to get to work. Sammy was with her, but when they saw me standing there, it was like there was a cooling breeze seeping through the room. The tensions just melted away. I had never seen my sister in that state before, her hair having thinned at the edges of her ear, and the bags under her eyes looking purple, her face sunken like she had forgotten how to smile. But seeing me, she lit up like dawn. She ran up to me with her arms open and stopped. "Can I hug you?" she asked. "Are you okay?" "I think so," I said. "Yeah." And so we hugged. And over her shoulder, I could see a corporate representative waiting for me in the hallway. Now, if you're confused, just know that I was too. We're getting there. Information was spotty at best. Somebody threw around a project called Black Bell. The name, super adaptive nanoliquid, was mentioned a couple of times. Basically, Sammy had given them the go-ahead to try a new treatment. I must have been on the candidate list since I was a loyal worker, and leaking company secrets would not only get me sued but cost me my career. Part of the deal was weekly checkups and participating in their trials. I could quit if I wanted to, but chances were that I would go right back to that hospital bed if the treatment wasn't completed. I didn't really have a choice, but I didn't blame them for it. They had their own interests to look out for, and I had been given this amazing opportunity. I could walk right out of there. That's worth an NDA. Coming back to the office a couple of weeks later, there were some people talking about me. They said the treatment had been developed in one of our branch labs in Vietnam. It had been mentioned in a couple of memos as something tested in relation to vacuum treatment in low oxygen environments. I had seen it too, but I had no idea that it had regenerative properties. I mean, you can read something on paper, but seeing it in action is another thing entirely. Most people didn't believe that I had really been in a fire. They thought that I had been taking time off, riding the coattails of an accident that consumed my apartment. I could have shown them the pictures, but that would somehow make it even more unbelievable. I decided to let them think whatever they wanted. The higher-ups knew the truth, and that was all that mattered. So slowly but surely, I got back into that endless cycle of overtime and sleep. Sammy was sticking around for a while to make sure that I managed, but apart from that, it was business as usual. Of course, what you see on the surface isn't always telling the whole story. I would stay up at night imagining that excruciating pain writhing just underneath the skin. What if there was a hiccup in the treatment, or some kind of side effect? Could all of it really come back? Could one wrong step send me back to the hospital bed? I would lose hours of sleep worrying, looking up at the ceiling of my new bedroom, closing my eyes but not sleeping. Still feeling the heat of the flames licking my skin. The hair on my arms curling up to die, little parts of me blending with the ashes, the smell of my own flesh cooking. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I was 2 weeks into my new routine when I had my first panic attack. Somebody brought in a birthday cake to work and they blew out the candles over lunch. There was something about the faint glow of fire reflecting on their skin that sent a spiral of thoughts rushing through me. Heat. My pulse ran away from me. I could imagine my skin trying to sweat, but the pores being melted shut. but no matter how hard I tried, I felt the pain. A mild heat latching onto me, burying itself in my skin. You can't think away a panic attack. You just have to ride it out and wish the next one is shorter. And talking to Sammy about it over dinner, she decided to stick around for a few more weeks. I hadn't asked her to do it, but she was happy to. She had made baked potatoes, and I had forgotten to buy new cutlery and plates, so we had to settle for paper plates and plastic forks. A single naked light bulb hung overhead. "You talk in your sleep, you know," she mentioned as the oven dinged. "I hear it through the walls." "What do I say?" "It's not really words, it's just like sounds," she said. "Long drawn-out vowels, but it kind of sounds like words." "I'll try to keep it down." She gave me an apologetic look. She knew I couldn't control it, and she knew that I couldn't try even if I wanted to. But it was a nice thought. It got worse, though. I would have nightmares and wake up choking. I'd feel my skin getting warmer at night. My anxiety would pop off at seemingly random times, kicking me out of whatever comfort zone that I had managed to make for myself. It could strike fast and stick around all day. And after a while, it was more unusual for me to have a good day than a bad one. Coming home from work one day, I stopped at a light. I sat in my car, hands on the wheels, seeing the light turn red as I came to a full stop. The radio jockey chuckled about putting on some classic dad rock for a caller and put on Kiss with the song Hotter Than Hell. It's a nice song, but it put my mind in an uncomfortable place. I stared at the red light, hoping that I wouldn't see the yellow light. Something about the glow of it put me right back there in the hallway, squirming around on the floor. The meat on my hand getting cooked on the surface of the heated metal elevator door. I closed my eyes and felt something. A soft, cooling coat expanded across my skin. The treatment. It was still there. I remember someone honking. Maybe the light had turned green, but I couldn't risk looking. I couldn't open my eyes. Maybe it would hurt. Maybe it had all turned dark. 100 maybes locking my hands on the steering wheel and keeping my eyes closed. And then a flicker. It's like I had manifested it. A spark reacting with my skin. Fire. It must have looked like an explosion. All the air getting sucked out at once, breaking the windows. The car popped from the release of pressure as the entire car lit up. Ungodly pain. I couldn't scream. A single flame danced on my eyes as they fused shut. Never endings exploded with agony as the bones on my knuckles exposed themselves to the open air. It happened so fast. Like somebody shutting off the lights inside your mind one by one. Sight, smell, hearing, taste, touch, thought. You can't breathe, there's no air. You don't know what you're doing and you can't feel yourself. Are you standing up, sitting down? It's impossible to tell. They say that I was completely engulfed in flames for a solid 2 minutes before a passerby managed to pull me out of the wreckage. They said that I was covered in a black liquid, which they thought was motor oil. I was dropped onto the pavement and the flames were put out by bystanders. The treatment kept me alive through all of it. Alive but suffering. It kept me on the edge of life, not allowing me to cross over, and the agony stuck with me for what felt like an eternity. But eventually the sirens came. The EMTs would never hear of what would be a second miraculous burn victim recovery. I would walk out of that hospital a couple of days later without any questions asked. The treatment put me right back to square one, perfect physical condition with a couple of mental asterisks. While the firefighters didn't understand what had happened, the corporation did. Apparently, my ceaseless obsession with fire was triggering an adaptive reaction. Basically, I was tricking myself, By thinking so much about burning, it became the normal state of being, and the treatment had adapted to it. It basically thought that I wanted to burn, and so it set me on fire. At least that's how it was explained to me. Knowing the cause of the issue helped, but also not. It's hard to put yourself in a state of mind where you're not allowing yourself to think certain things. It's like biting your nails or picking your nose. Thinking of how you can't do it makes it worse. Knowing that thinking too much about this one thing might cause a fire was as all-consuming as the flames themselves. Sammy didn't leave me though. She figured out a couple of things that we could do to alleviate stress. For example, I could start sleeping in the bathtub, and we could remove anything flammable. No drapes, no plastics. We also kept a fire blanket nearby. It was uncomfortable, but you can get used to anything. It was nice to know that it was there in case I needed it. A precaution. It puts you at ease and you stop obsessing over it as much. I would go to weekly checkups. They had me fill out forms, rating sensations and experiences on scales from 1 to 10 and rarely to often. A lot of it was generalized questions, but a couple of them were specifically made for me. These questions didn't have a standard answering sheet. There'd be some overpaid academic listing off questions with a nonchalant smile. Every week, a different smile but the same attitude. I got the impression that I wasn't the only one testing this treatment. The questions they asked implied that others were having trouble as well, but in completely different ways. Multiple choice questions like, how often do you forget to breathe? How often do you forget to sleep? How much is your sense of touch diminished? With possible answers ranging from hourly to monthly. I made more adjustments in my everyday life. Fire blankets, extinguishers. Once I filled the tub with water before sleeping as I felt an episode coming on. The ink would seep out of my skin to keep me from going hypothermic. It really was adaptive. Sammy did her best to help, but something she said stuck with me. As I was heading to work, she took some time cleaning out the tub. I asked her if she was okay doing that. Oh, it's not that different from changing bandages, she said. You gotta adapt either way. At least there's no pain, right? Trauma seeps into you like a poison. The bad days become the new normal, and the good days become this impossible ideal that you strive to get. That perfect day without that sinking feeling in your chest, where you can sleep a little longer without waking up tired, where you can say that you had a nice dream and can afford to put some effort into caring for yourself. Have that extra long shower, the freshly pressed clothes. But I couldn't do that. I'd be balancing on the edge, ready to burst into flames. I wouldn't wear my best clothes. I would stay in the tub at night. I would keep my distance from my sister and my coworkers. All these little things you do to keep yourself from becoming a problem. And even then, things would spiral out of control. It happened once as I was going from the supermarket to my car. I don't even know what made me snap. Suddenly, it was all just fire. I burned all my groceries and I was left exposed in the parking lot, covered in ash and writhing in pain. It was a short enough burn for my nerves to stay, making me feel every boil and crack in my skin, blood and soot on the concrete. The most embarrassing time it happened was at work. I felt it coming and I hid in the bathroom again. As the flames burst out, the fire alarm tripped. Sprinklers came on and I got a nasty burn, but not as bad as the other times. I could still walk out of there. I draped myself in a jacket and had to walk in front of all my coworkers, naked from the waist down and covered in boils. After that, I was put on paid leave while my treatment continued. We were going to work out an action plan with a therapist, but they had some trouble getting one that was available at this level of corporate secrecy. So while it dragged on, all I could do was wander around and try my best not to think of something that could burn my house down at a moment's notice. It was getting to me, and I suspect to Sammy as well. One night, it happened in the bath. I had an awful dream which shook me right awake. The bathroom was pitch black. Despite my eyes being open, it was dark, and then it spiraled into this thought of my eyes having fused shut. It pushed that first domino in my chest, and by the time that I got out of the bath, I was on fire, casting crawling shadows along the walls. Sammy came running. She tried to help me, but she ended up burning her hands. I pushed her away, giving her another burn on her neck. I pulled myself into the bath and turned on the water. It's hard to do when you don't have any skin on your fingers. Blood is slippery and the knobs in the shower can be a bit finicky. The fire alarm was going crazy, but Sammy managed to turn it off. Concerned neighbors came knocking at the door and she had to turn them away with a bleeding neck and hands. And I just lay in the bath watching the last embers on my skin disappear, putting me back in the soothing dark. I locked the door, begging for the night to be over. Things got complicated after that. Of course, Sammy didn't want to leave, but the bandages on her neck and hands broke my heart. The way she winced as she made herself a peanut butter jelly sandwich, the salt stinging her wounds. I lied to her and said the company was bringing over a live-in care provider. I wasn't completely untrue, it had been discussed, in passing. I waved goodbye to Sammy from the kitchen window. A cab drove off with her and I could finally relax. She was out of harm's way. My way. I tried to deal with my anxiety in other ways. I went out a lot, and booze helps a bit, especially if there's a lot of distractions. Live bands playing loud music, pretty girls waving their long hair around. Anything to get the finger in your mind away from that first domino that sets you spiraling into oblivion. I thought that I could make something fun out of it. Once when I got really drunk, I tried showing it as a party trick to a couple of barflies. They thought that I was kidding around and that I was some kind of fire breather or something. So when I willingly set myself on fire, they were horrified. They didn't know about my treatment. So when the dark ink covered my skin, it looked like I had been turned into coal. Their ear twisted as they ran screaming back into the bar. One of them called the police and another fainted. They covered their noses, trying not to breathe in my fumes. I locked my knees into place, forcing my body to stay upright past the snapping musculature. My head dangled as my neck gave out. I fell face first into a puddle, but the treatment had stopped me from suffocating. An inch of water and it would have killed me. And by the time that a patrol arrived, I was long gone, leaving my tattered clothes in a black pile. I knew the roads well enough, I didn't care anymore. Coming home that night, I considered my options. I could keep going down this path, hoping that something would change, or I could struggle and kick my way through a life lived on the precipice of pain. No matter what I did, there would always be that fear brewing in the back of my mind, reminding me that I was never far away from the gates of my own hell. I sat on my balcony for a while looking up at the stars. There was something beautiful there, a kinship. They burned too, but they hadn't known another life. Perhaps that was the way to go. The next day, I took my car and I drove into the desert. I parked and left a note. No valuables. I hid the keys under the front tire, stripped down, and put my clothes under the hood. There was no point in them getting burned. I wanted a fresh pair when I got back, if I got back. And then I walked. I felt the sun on my skin as I sensed the heat boiling at the edge of my mind. "Come on," I muttered. "Come on." I made myself think of it. I forced myself into it. I kicked myself down the black spiral in my mind and I let the impressions take over. "Come on," I begged. "Get it over with." And when the flames came, I was relieved. I just let it happen. The fire's burning my eyes shut and sucking the air out of my lungs. My body crackling and popping, breaking at the seams with every twist and turn. Your senses disappear, you can't scream. And with the treatment keeping me alive, I locked myself in a spiraling struggle as my body was repaired and burned over and over. Acrid flesh, ammonia, and burnt hair coming and going as my sense of smell circled. Flashes of light as my cornea struggled to remain. A violent sound coming and going, like a screaming wave crashing into my skull. Never-ending pain. The kind of agony where a second turns into lifetimes. But it was too late. There was no one coming to save me. What had I done? You don't really taste anything. There might be little spots of blood, leaving an impression of iron on your tongue, but it came and went. Same with touch. It would be pain or nothing. After a while, I stopped trying to breathe. I let my throat stay closed and the treatment would keep me alive. I would feel my heart slowly adapting. I realized that if I was calculated, I could make micro movements in bouts of muscular repair, meaning if I tried long enough, I could move, but only so slightly. I remember laying in the sand. The flashes of light were darker. It must have been nighttime. I had managed to move my hand straight into view so I could see my own fingers. And there'd be darkness, a little light from the moon, a flash of clarity showing a coal-wrapped skeletonized hand, liquidized boiled fat staining the black sands around me. I tried to think, but even my brain was affected. There would be long stretches of time where I sensed this gate in the back of my head, barring me from chasing any complicated thoughts. I couldn't remember my name. I could just think of something short and immediate. Bursts of effort and strain. As my lungs came and went, I could think of sounds to make, vowels mostly. I settled on a couple that I found easy to repeat, just to remind myself that I was alive. E and O sounded particularly nice. Yo, yo, yo. As I couldn't see or hear anything, my mind started to fill in the blanks. The waves of painful screeching in my ears started to sound like voices in music. The flickering lights began to look like angels. I would have conversations with them, and the pain would lull into a background noise, a nuisance at most. I would have these presences sit down next to me. One had a voice like a beautiful piano, talking sonatas that would make me weep. Another would lie down next to me and wrap their arms around me, their breath on my neck like a soothing wind. They would whisper of beautiful places and far-off lands, a beach where no one is alone, an island paradise where the sands are pink, a tree that reaches for the moon wanting to go home, little stories and melodies playing in the fire, begging me to stay. I could feel my needs melting away. When you're at the bottom of every sensation, there's no point in trying to look up. What's a glass of water when your world is on fire? What's a night of sleep when you're living in a nightmare? I let it all go, embracing the pain. It was so easy. After a while, I realized that I could direct my efforts like managing a switchboard. Keep the eyes off, I would think. Keep the eyes and the ears off. Instead, I would focus on the muscles, keeping me at intense pain levels but allowing me to move and to touch. I don't know if anyone saw me, I don't think they did. But if anyone had seen me, they would have seen a charred body rise from the ashes, facing the moon. I'd wander the sands, inviting the pain into the soles of my feet. I didn't care about stepping on branches or rocks. I'd feel the wind fanning the flames, fueling me like an engine. The more I moved, the more it hurt and the more that I could keep going. And as I moved, air would push into my lungs, leaving me with enough room to scream. And with that, I would howl at the moon like a beast. Eo, Eo, Eo. Time would pass and it wouldn't. Your days don't really start or end, it all just keeps going. What was real and what wasn't would be blurred, making me chase thoughts I didn't know that I had. I'd make up words that even a burned mouth could say, borrowing meaning from whispers in the fire. Words with depth and power that I would forget in a second or an hour. There was no way to tell. I would imagine other burning people walking alongside me. Sometimes I would see them dancing at the edge of my vision. Long, elegant movement with trails of smoke puffing into the sky. Little lights allowing themselves to burn out and die. I would cry for them and laugh at them. And all the while I suffered, but that was normal. I would fall to my knees and stay there smoldering, not moving an inch. I would give in to the thoughts that tricked into sparks of consciousness, becoming a conduit to whatever spoke through me. Vows trickling past broken teeth, a prayer perhaps. My most vivid memory is that moment when I'm kneeling in the sand. Even with my eyes closed, I could tell that I wasn't in our world anymore. I was in a world of fire praying to an ocean of molten steel. Another dead man propped up to suffer. Eo. The burning angels would listen and dance. The ocean of pain would soothe me. There was no heat anymore. It was home. I had finally reached the other side of the shore, where pain was life and being without it was agony. I had adapted. I had learned. I had been perfected and I came home. I opened my eyes. They followed me through. A dozen others wielding the same black ink across their bodies. They had adapted too. They had been made tall and strong and mad. They had wandered other worlds, exposed to other horrors, and they had been made grateful just like me. Brothers, sisters, a family carved from agony and blisters. I had gone from ecstasy to ceaseless horror. It felt like time had stopped and that I was settling into a strange eternity. One where complete inaction was the only logical thing to pursue. Turning myself static, I could feel what that first fire had felt, warming our ancestors. I was on the wrong side of life, looking out at those struggling. I was beyond them, but something in me was still too human to accept it. But I was getting there and it was so comfortable. A life without worries means a life without drive, but is that such a bad thing? And then a drop of water. I didn't feel the first one, but as the rain gathered, the flames died. I had been in pain so long that being without it made me sick. All those little systems of my body that I had forgotten or cast away coming back to me. Eyes, ears, taste, each and every one more terrible than the other. I cried and begged the heavens to send me back, but I was forgetting the right words and the broken spots in my brain were coming back to me. The heavens couldn't hear me and I couldn't make them listen. I lay there for hours hoping that I would dream myself back to that other world where I belonged, but I had lost it. My car had been towed. People had looked for me, but they hadn't found me. All in all, I figured I had been gone for a couple of days at most. Turns out, it was 16 days in total. A lot of people thought that I had been kidnapped or killed. And for the second time in less than a year, Sammy would see me come back from the dead. The treatment was deemed too dangerous. They didn't specify why. Maybe the discussion with the therapist got a little out of hand when I started to talk about ink-covered angels. Or maybe it was my desire to put myself back on fire. Either way, they had a kill switch to deactivate the whole thing, and they used it. Made me cough up something akin to a metal glob. They put it on a metal tray and moved it to a liquid nitrogen container with a stylized blue sunflower logo. It was strange looking at the treatment like a separate physical thing. It had been a part of me, and losing it felt like removing an organ. I know I should have felt different once it was off, but it didn't. I still had the same thoughts, the same problems. But now that I thought about the fires, I didn't know whether to long for them or to cower in fear. Maybe both. At least I didn't have to worry about hurting anyone. I was still on paid leave. I moved in with Sammy for a while just to get a change in environment. I met some new people and I grounded myself a bit. It's so easy to lose sight of the little things when your mind is in 10 different places. Sometimes you don't need much to make your day. A pat on the shoulder, a cool drink after a long day. The little things can do wonders. I eventually made my way back home. I returned to the office. I got a new place that didn't have a bathtub. I started talking to people without shying away, and I'd keep my eyes on the traffic lights when I came to a full stop. I had crossed the line where pain didn't scare me anymore. When you have known what I know, everything else seems dull in comparison. And if push comes to shove, I've lived through the worst of it. I wouldn't mind seeing it again someday. This was years ago, and my life looks very different today. I'm engaged and I live in a new town. New job, same company. I got a dog. But even now, as all things lull into a new normalcy, I think of those days. On the darkest nights, I can picture those ink-covered beings out there watching over me from afar, waiting for me to remember and come home. I fear that I might still have a part of me stuck in that place, that someday I'll just snap, and I don't know what's worse, to be paralyzed by fear or to long for it. Much like my cousin, I don't believe in hell. I don't think we can suffer forever. And sometimes when it rains, I long to burn.